Chapter 2240. The bizarre scene caused Nietian to frown and exclaim, "It's a sword shadow!" He had assumed that it was a woman hiding next to him, but instead, it was a sword projection. The sword projection wasn't very large and hovered there in midair, almost as if it were floating in midair. Nietian could sense a powerful space-time aura emanating from it. Even as Nietian looked on in shock, a clear voice echoed out from within the sword projection. "This isn't fun," she said. "I'm not playing with you anymore." Shockingly, a violet-garbed young woman stepped out from within the sword projection. She looked very young, perhaps 18 or 19 years old. Her features were exquisite, and she was pure and charming. She was like a lotus flower rising out of the water, like a girl next door. Most shocking of all was that she was a mid-paramount god, which made her even stronger than Nietian. Nietian was certain that she really was 18 or 19 years old, and not just because she looked young. A mid-paramount god who was 18 or 19 years old was completely freakish. Next, something even more shocking happened to Nietian. Just as the purple-clothed girl took a step forward, an extremely strange sword momentum surged out from her body. It circulated in the space, seeming to exist and not exist, as if it had merged with the space. Elementary sword and martial arts fusion. Nietian could sense the level of the young woman's Tao of the sword, and his eyes went wide with shock. Not only was this young woman a mid-paramount god, but she also had the elementary sword and martial arts fusion cultivation base. That level of strength matched up with her age. This young woman in violet had shocking talent. Nietian went blank for a moment, unable to come to his senses for a long time. When the young woman saw Nietian's reaction, her expression turned cold. "Are you stupid?" she said. "Have you never seen a beautiful woman before?" Only then did Nietian come to his senses, and he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Although this young woman wasn't bad-looking, she wasn't beautiful enough to shock the mortal world. What shocked Nietian wasn't her looks, but rather, her talent. "Miss, who are you? Why did you appear here?" After calming down, Nietian asked in a deep voice. Although this purple-clothed girl had a very arrogant attitude, she didn't seem to have any hostility towards Nietian. If she really wanted to kill Nietian, she could have done it secretly. There was no need for her to show herself. At this moment, Nietian understood everything. The girl in front of him was an extremely rare swordsman. Her sword will was not of the 9 elemental attribute, nor was it a 9 elemental variant attribute. Instead, it was of the space-time attribute. Generally speaking, a swordsman's sword intent belonged to the 9-element attribute, and some even had the 9-element variant attribute. However, this purple-clothed girl's sword intent was actually of the extremely rare space-time attribute. It was precisely because of this that the sword shadow she condensed could perfectly fuse with the surrounding space. The sword shadow she released was actually equivalent to a space-time door or a space-time whirlpool. Therefore, she could walk out of the sword shadow just now. Nietian had seen all kinds of swordsmen, but it was his first time encountering a space-time attribute swordsman. If there were no universe boundaries, he wouldn't even discover the sword shadow condensed by the purple-clothed girl. Space-time attribute swordsman was indeed terrifying. Nietian was very curious. Who the hell was this purple-clothed girl? Why did she find him? It seemed like the purple-clothed girl had been lurking by his side for a very long time. "Fool, if you don't want to die, then leave with this young lady obediently." The purple-clothed girl's posture was very arrogant, completely raising her neck to talk to Nietian. Her eyes were also cold and indifferent. "Little girl, just based on one sentence of yours and you want me to leave with you? Aren't you too naive?" Nietian laughed and couldn't help being somewhat speechless. He had no understanding of the purple-clothed girl at all. Of course, it was impossible for him to leave with the latter. "My name is June Ouching, not little girl." The purple-clothed girl was very dissatisfied with the way the little girl addressed her, and said her name angrily. My name is Nietian, not fool. Nietian smiled and replied indifferently. Nietian is Nietian. What's so great about that? Jun Ouching scoffed and said, You have no idea that your whereabouts have long been exposed. I estimate that the 3,000 Imperial Guards of the Dead Knight Empire are already on their way. It won't take long for them to arrive here. Nietian frowned slightly and said, Why should I believe you? It's up to you whether you believe me or not. Jun Ouching smiled coldly. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and raised her snow-white neck high. She was so proud that she was like a little princess. All right then, let's go our separate ways. I hope we'll meet again. Nietian smiled faintly and turned around to leave. Seeing that Nietian was really leaving, Jun Ouching panicked and yelled, You idiot, come back here! Little girl, is there anything else? Nietian turned around and looked at Jun Ouching with a calm smile. You idiot, you're so stupid! Jun Ouching's face turned red with anger. You just absorbed the power of the 9 Hearts Lotus. There are still traces of the Lotus aura in your body. The Dead Knight Ancestor has a 9 Hearts compass. He can sense your location at any time. If you return to the Thousand Demons Cave now, you'll be seeking death. If you continue to stay here, you'll be waiting for death. If you don't want to seek death and don't want to wait for death, then follow me obediently. After saying this in one breath, Jun Ouching saw that Nietian was stunned. She couldn't help but feel proud and said, How about it, big idiot? Do you want to leave with me? After hearing Jun Ouching's words, Nietian's expression immediately became serious. The 9 Hearts Lotus, this was something he hadn't thought of. Looking at Jun Ouching's expression, she definitely didn't look like she was lying. Little girl, is what you said true? Nietian suddenly raised his head to look at Jun Ouching and asked in a deep voice. I'm so pretty and cute. Am I the kind of person who would lie? Jun Ouching's face was brimming with a proud smile as she spoke with an arrogant attitude. Nietian's brows tightened again and he asked, Little girl, let me ask you another question. What is your purpose for following me? Seeing Nietian's serious expression, Jun Ouching couldn't help but be stunned. Her beautiful eyes flickered and she said, I don't want to answer this question. Is that okay? No. Nietian Tianlin coldly responded with an icy gaze. Feeling Nietian's hostility, Jun Ouching suddenly froze and became anxious. She loudly shouted, You idiot! I'm here to save you, not to kill you. What kind of attitude is this? Saving me requires a reason, doesn't it? The corner of Nietian's mouth rose in a strange arc as he coldly responded. Jun Ouching saw that Nietian was very serious. Her beautiful eyes hesitated for a moment before she finally said, Okay, since you want to know the reason, I'll tell you. I was entrusted by someone, so I came to save you. Chapter 2241. Nietian heard Jun Ouching's words. She had been entrusted by someone to save him. He couldn't help but feel confused. Who was the person behind Jun Ouching? A mysterious person? Was there a relationship between Jun Ouching and the mysterious person? Idiot, the people from the Dead Knight Empire are here, let's leave this place first. But at this moment Jun Ouching shouted, her expression becoming nervous. First of all, tell me, who asked you to come here? Nietian asked in a deep voice, looking very calm. He didn't sense any aura, but he knew that Jun Ouching didn't lie to him. Jun Ouching was a space-time swordsman. She was much more sensitive to any movement in space-time than ordinary people. Idiot, do you really have to ask this question at this time? Jun Ouching said snappily, looking very anxious. Then, an almost transparent sword appeared in her hand. She swung it in the air and a space-time sword appeared. Let's leave this place first. Jun Ouching turned to look at Nietian and said hurriedly. At that moment there was a faint vibration in the surrounding space. It was obvious that a large group of martial artists was rushing over. However, Nietian looked indifferent and said calmly, Tell me first, who asked you to save me? There's no time. Can't we talk after we leave this place? June Ouching suddenly looked up and saw a black mass of figures in the sky. She couldn't help but sound anxious. Nye Tian also noticed the figures in the sky. They were the guards of the dead Night Empire. It seemed that June Ouching didn't lie to him. However, he still wanted to know who was behind June Ouching. "Tell me, who is it?" Nye Tian didn't move. His eyes were determined. "You big idiot, I promise you that after I leave this place, I will tell you everything. Is that okay?" June Ouching said hurriedly when she saw that the passing Night Imperial Guard was about to arrive. "Sure." Nye Tian nodded and smiled. What he wanted was June Ouching's guarantee. June Ouching was stunned for a moment before she realized that Nye Tian was actually testing her. However, she had no time to be angry. The two of them stepped into the space-time sword shadow and disappeared. The moment the sword shadow disappeared, countless figures in black appeared in the sky above the valley. They were all the passing Night Imperial Guards. A figure descended. It was the old ancestor of the dead knight. Yi Chunli followed closely behind, but the two of them froze on the spot at the same time. At this moment, the valley was empty. There was no sign of Nye Tian. "Old ancestor, where's that kid?" Yi Chunli reacted and cried out in shock. But ancestor passing knight's face was stiff, unable to speak for a long time. The 9 hearts compass showed that Nye Tian was clearly inside this valley. How could there be no one? Furthermore, just earlier, old ancestor passing knight still sensed Nye Tian's aura. But in an instant the aura disappeared. It was seriously too strange. How is this possible? Old ancestor passing knight's gaze turned to the 9 hearts compass but completely could not find Nye Tian's shadow. He could not help crying out strangely, "This kid can still disappear into thin air?" How could he know that the current Nye Tian disappeared into thin air? Although the 9 hearts compass could sense the 9 hearts demonic lotus's aura, the distance was too far away. It naturally could not sense it either. The current Nye Tian was long already far away from the Burial Cloud mountain range. The 9 hearts compass was useless too. Damn it! Suddenly, old ancestor passing knight roared explosively. A violent force gushed out. The entire valley actually collapsed with a loud bang. Originally, he was already about to catch Nye Tian, but the latter disappeared inexplicably. How could this not make him furious? Yi Chunli's eyes trembled as he looked at old ancestor passing knight, and only dared to speak after a long time. That kid already disappeared. Apart from leaving this place, what else can we do? Old ancestor passing knight roared angrily, stomped his foot, and directly left. Yi Chunli had an ugly expression, and he was furious to the extreme in his heart. He roared solemnly, "Nye Tian, if I can't kill you with my own hands, I'm not Yi Chunli." At this time, his hatred for Nye Tian was higher than the sky and deeper than the sea. He wished that he could tear the latter's corpse into 1,000 pieces, then whip the corpse to vent his anger, and then grind the bones to dust. But unfortunately, Nye Tian had long fled to God knows where. At the same time, high above in the sky at the periphery of the Burial Cloud mountain range. High above in the clear sky, on the surface, there seemed to be nothing. But in the space, there were 2 figures currently sprinting with all their might. Currently, in the space, there were countless space-time sword shadows arranged in a very orderly manner. If one could see with the naked eye, one would discover that these sword shadows were separated by about 100,000 meters from each other, and they were all connected as a whole. It was like an endless passageway that led to who knew where. And 2 figures were currently traversing through these sword shadows rapidly. These 2 figures were none other than Nye Tian and June Ouching. Nye Tian continuously traversed through the space-time sword shadows. For every sword shadow that disappeared, he advanced 100,000 meters. At this moment, he could not help but admire June Ouching's methods. So many space-time sword shadows must have been set up beforehand. This little girl was very smart. Before finding Nye Tian, she had already set up a passageway to escape. After all, the Forsaken Land was formed from a fragment of the sacred world. The space-time stability was extremely high. Even if June Ouching was a space-time swordsman, it was impossible for her to perform long-distance space-time movement. Each sword shadow of hers could only traverse a distance of 100,000 meters. Therefore, she could only use this seemingly stupid but actually very smart method to help her and Nie Tian escape quickly. After a while, after traversing through countless space-time sword shadows, Nie Tian and June Ouching came to the outside of a thorny jungle. Okay, we're safe now. Let's take a rest. June Ouching let out a long breath of turbid air and directly descended. The space-time sword shadows that she had set up only reached this point, so the two of them stopped here. Little girl, good technique. Nie Tian's figure descended and came to June Ouching's side. He smiled faintly and praised her. Do I need you to tell me that? June Ouching had a complacent look on her face, but her forehead was covered with dense beads of sweat. It seemed that traversing through so many space-time sword shadows was also a big burden for her. Just now, when she and Nie Tian traversed through 100 space-time sword shadows, the total distance of all the space-time sword shadows was 20,000 kilometers. In other words, she and Nie Tian had traversed 20,000 kilometers in just a moment. At this time, June Ouching's complexion recovered a lot. Suddenly, she thought of something. Her beautiful eyes stared at Nie Tian and solemnly warned, "Idiot, you are not allowed to call me little girl in the future. My name is June Ouching, remember it clearly, June Ouching. If you dare to call me little girl again, I will dig your eyes out." So ruthless. Nie Tian was speechless. He smiled and then said, "As long as you don't call me idiot, I won't call you little girl. Fair, right?" June Ouching's beautiful eyes flickered. She seemed to think for a long time and finally nodded. Chapter 2242. Hearing Nie Tian's words, June Ouching's eyes flickered and she asked, "Nie Tian, do you really want to know?" "Miss June, you are so beautiful and lovely. You don't seem to be the kind of person who will break her promise." Nie Tian smiled lightly, and his eyes were firm and confident. It was only a matter of a word to deal with this kind of girl. Looking at Nie Tian, June Ouching couldn't help blushing, and then she took a deep breath and murmured, "Forget it, I won't break my promise. Since I promised to tell you everything, I won't hide it from you." Nie Tian nodded and smiled, waiting for June Ouching's answer. "I saved you because of my grandpa's order." June Ouching looked at Nie Tian and said seriously. "And then?" Nie Tian was dazed for a second, and signaled June Ouching to continue. "There's no then." June Ouching, on the other hand, was stunned and said, "You asked me, who asked me to save you, I have already answered you." Nie Tian was speechless, and he wanted to cry but had no tears. June Ouching just said that she was ordered by her grandpa. What kind of answer was that? How did Nie Tian know who her grandpa was? "June Ouching, who is your grandpa?" Taking a deep breath, Nie Tian calmed down and then asked, "Who is my grandpa? It's none of your business. Why should I tell you?" June Ouching looked arrogant, and her attitude was quite arrogant. Nie Tian looked at June Ouching and swallowed his saliva. He was so angry that he was about to vomit blood. He couldn't tell whether June Ouching really didn't understand his question, or she was pretending not to understand. "Why did your grandpa ask you to save me?" Taking a deep breath, Nie Tian forced himself to calm down and continued to ask. "This is my grandpa's business. You should ask him." June Ouching rolled her eyes and glanced at Nie Tian from the corner of her eyes. She arrogantly said, "I want to see if you can really fulfill the old man's conditions since Grandpa asked me to save you." Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed as he vaguely understood something. It seemed that June Ouching's grandfather had saved him because he wanted him to do something for him. As for what it was, June Ouching knew, but she didn't say it. Also, the identity of June Ouching's grandfather made Nie Tian very puzzled. He had guessed that June Ouching's grandfather might be the mysterious man. But now, He didn't think so. Because if the mysterious man wanted him to do something, he could just tell him directly. There was no need to go through so much trouble. But he vaguely felt that this matter must have something to do with the mysterious man. Humph! At this time, June Ouching suddenly glared at Nye Tian and said, I don't believe that you can do something that even I can't do. June Ouching, what does your grandpa want me to do? Nye Tian smiled and asked tentatively. I'm not interested in telling you. June Ouching's eyes were arrogant, and she said directly, when you reach Cloud Valley Sacred Sky, you will naturally know. Nye Tian was speechless. This little girl's attitude was quite good just now. Why did she suddenly turn gloomy? Then, June Ouching rested for half a day. Her strength was almost recovered, so she stood up and said, Let's go. Okay. Nye Tian didn't refuse. He was also very curious about what was waiting for him next. With the help of June Ouching's space-time sword Shadow, June Ouching and Nye Tian advanced at a very fast speed. About half a day later, the two arrived at the edge of a continuous mountain range. We're here. June Ouching looked down at the continuous mountain range, and her little face finally showed a hint of joy. Is this the Cloud Valley Sagely Heaven? Nye Tian looked down and smiled faintly. The mountain range below them was very high above sea level. All the mountains, except for a few peaks, were all shrouded in thick clouds. The entire mountain range was shrouded in layers of clouds and churning mists, giving off a mysterious and sacred feeling. No wonder this place was called Cloud Valley Sacred Sky. Yes. June Ouching nodded proudly. Then, she moved and said, Follow me. Nye Tian followed closely behind June Ouching, and the two came directly to the ground. Follow behind me. Don't run around. June Ouching looked back at Nye Tian cautiously. Nye Tian looked around and didn't find anything suspicious. Instead, he saw a few majestic mountains halfway up the mountain. They seemed to belong to some sect. After a while, June Ouching and Nye Tian arrived at the foot of a mountain. In front of them were two huge stone pillars with dragon carvings. They were thousands of meters tall and looked like pillars that reached into the sky. In the middle of the two stone pillars was a small stone door. Contrasted against the stone pillars, it looked very small. Come on. June Ouching said faintly and was about to enter the stone door. Wait. However, at that moment, a deep voice suddenly came from the sky. Following which, several figures descended along the two stone pillars with dragon carvings. Nye Tian frowned slightly as he looked at the figures. Clearly, they had been hiding on the stone pillars the entire time. It seemed they were waiting for Nye Tian and June Ouching to arrive. Nye Tian's eyes flickered as he looked at them. All of them were sword users and were extremely powerful. All of them were paramount gods. That was especially true of the leader. He wore a white robe and looked very young, but he was definitely under 10,000 years old. However, he was already a late paramount god, and had reached the pinnacle of the Tao of the Sword. There was no doubt that he was a genius in the Tao of the Sword. Nye Tian could sense an intense coldness coming from him, so he deduced that he was a rare ice-type sword cultivator. June Ouching obviously recognized the white-robed man. Her eyes flashed, and she said in a cold voice, Ling Hanfeng, it's you. That's right, it's me. Ling Hanfeng smiled coldly. His eyes swept over June Ouching, and there was an undisguised lust in them. He laughed and said, Miss Ouching, I haven't seen you for a year, and you've grown even more beautiful. Whether I'm beautiful or not has nothing to do with you. Get out of the way. June Ouching hated Ling Hanfeng very much, and directly scolded him. Miss Ouching, what's the hurry? We haven't seen each other for a year, shouldn't we have a good chat? Ling Hanfeng obviously had no intention of getting out of the way. He laughed and moved closer to June Ouching. The corner of his mouth curled up into a rippling smile. A pair of greedy eyes wandered unscrupulously over June Ouching's body. Ling Hanfeng, you're shameless. June Ouching looked at Ling Hanfeng and scolded. She was very disgusted. Miss Ouching, I didn't do anything. How am I shameless? Ling Han smiled wanly and said, Is it Lady Ao Qing who wishes for me to become shameless? Ling Han Feng you. June Ouching frowned, and her delicate face suddenly became red. She was so angry that she couldn't speak. Ling Han Feng looked at June Ouching and laughed. He wanted to say something, but he saw a figure directly step over. Chapter 2243. Nie Tian stared coldly at Ling Han Feng. His eyes were as cold as ice and filled with killing intent. Ling Han Feng looked at Nie Tian and was stunned for a moment. Then, he laughed wildly and said, Kid, you're the guy that Lord invited, right? I thought you would be an earth-shattering swordsman. But now, it seems that I was completely wrong. Early-stage paramount god with the elementary unity of sword and martial. In the Sacred Heaven Sword League, calling someone like you trash is already flattering you. Ling Hanfeng's words immediately caused the people behind him to burst into laughter. Lord sent Miss June Ouching to save someone, but who would have thought that the person she saved would be trash? A trash that only has the elementary unity of sword and martial wants to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal? What a joke! The Sacred Heaven Sword Seal is a powerful existence. None of the 100 million Wan Jian Dao geniuses in the Sacred Heaven Sword League could break it. Can this white-haired trash do it? They laughed arrogantly and directly regarded Nie Tian as trash. Nie Tian didn't have much of a reaction when he heard their words. He only frowned slightly. He seemed to have understood something. The place he was currently at should be called the Sacred Heaven Sword League. And June Ouching's grandfather should be the Lord of the Sacred Heaven Sword League. It was this Lord who sent June Ouching to save him. And the reason for saving him seemed to be to let him break a sword seal, the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. From their words, Nie Tian could tell that the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was a very powerful sword-intent seal. No one in the entire Sacred Heaven Sword League could break it. No wonder June Ouching looked at Nie Tian with a strange gaze and said something like how Nie Tian could do something that even she couldn't. It seemed that June Ouching had also tried to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal but failed. From the looks of it, the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was extremely important to the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance. Otherwise, the Alliance Master wouldn't have spent so much effort to save Nie Tian. It was just that Nie Tian himself was a little doubtful. Such a powerful sword seal, could he break it? Then, he became much calmer, and his gaze landed on Ling Han Feng. There was no need to worry about the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. He should deal with this arrogant fool first. Brat, are you very unconvinced? Ling Han Feng could feel the coldness in Nie Tian's eyes, and he laughed maniacally and arrogantly. Nie Tian frowned, but ignored Ling Han Feng. Instead, he looked towards June Ouching and asked, June Ouching, do you know him? June Ouching didn't know what Nie Tian wanted to do. She nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. Of course Miss Ouching knows me. I'm her fiancé. At this time, Ling Han Feng laughed, looked at June Ao Qing with a wretched look, and said loudly, Ling Han Feng, don't talk nonsense. Hearing Ling Han Feng's words, June Ouching panicked. Her pretty face was as red as a ripe apple, and she hurriedly said, You and your father only proposed to my grandfather, but my grandfather didn't agree at all. So what if he didn't agree? Ling Han Feng's eyes suddenly turned cold. He stared straight at June Ouching and said darkly, June Ouching, don't worry. I'll propose to you every year until the Alliance Master agrees. Ling Han Feng, you're shameless. June Ouching was so angry that her little face trembled, and her eyes became moist. A year ago, Ling Han Feng had proposed to her, but her grandfather didn't agree at all. Who would have thought that Ling Han Feng would be so shameless and announce everywhere that he was June Ouching's fiancé? She was just a little girl, so of course she couldn't keep her face. She had mentioned this matter to her grandfather many times, but the latter was helpless and could only turn a blind eye to it. Although Jun Aoqing's grandfather was the Alliance Master of the Sacred Heaven Sword League, there were some things that he couldn't do anything about. The Sacred Heaven Sword League was jointly established by the 7 major sword sects in the Abandoned Land. The Alliance Master had to consider the 7 major sword sects in everything he did. Ling Hanfeng's identity was very special. He was the son of the High Wind Sword Sect's sect master. The High Wind Sword Sect was one of the 7 major sword sects in the Sacred Heaven Sword League. It was only weaker than the Rakshasa Sword Sect. If not for this, Ling Hanfeng wouldn't have dared to propose to Jun Aoqing. At this moment, Nie Tian looked at Jun Aoqing and asked indifferently, "Jun Aoqing, you mean that there's no relationship between you and this guy, right?" "Yes, there's no relationship." Jun Aoqing nodded her head heavily and said firmly, "Since that's the case, then it's easy." Nie Tian smiled faintly and turned to look at Ling Hanfeng. His expression was cold and murderous. Ling Hanfeng sensed the murderous intent in Nie Tian's eyes and couldn't help but frown as he asked in a cold tone, "Brat, what do you want?" "Ling Hanfeng, I'll give you a chance," Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "Apologize to Jun Aoqing immediately and disappear from my sight. Can you do that?" What? Ling Hanfeng was stunned for a moment as if he suspected that he had misheard. He pointed at his ears arrogantly and said, "My ears aren't very good. What did you just say? Say it again." "Ha ha ha, this brat must be an idiot. He actually dares to threaten Third Young Master." The others laughed arrogantly and looked at Nie Tian as if they were looking at an idiot. Ling Hanfeng was the 3rd son of the Cloud-Soaring Sword Sect's sect leader, so they called him Third Young Master. Jun Aoqing's beautiful eyes flashed. She hadn't expected Nie Tian to say such a thing. In her opinion, Nie Tian was indeed a talented swordsman. However, she felt that Nie Tian definitely wasn't a match for Ling Hanfeng. When she had found Nie Tian earlier, the duel between him and Yi Chunli had already ended. Therefore, she hadn't seen Nie Tian fight, so she didn't know much about Nie Tian's true battle prowess. However, she was very familiar with Ling Hanfeng's strength. Ling Hanfeng was a late-stage paramount god who had reached the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. On top of that, his sword intent was of the frost attribute. Therefore, even a peak paramount god wouldn't be a match for him. Nie Tian only had the strength of an early-stage paramount god. How could he possibly be a match for Ling Hanfeng? "You don't have good ears, do you?" At this time, Nie Tian suddenly smiled. The corners of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. He suddenly took a step forward and said coldly, "Since you don't have good ears, then don't take them." Swoosh. The moment his cold voice fell, a sword intent whistled out. It was so fast that it couldn't be blinked. Ling Hanfeng only saw a flash of sword light in front of him, and then he felt a tearing pain in his ear. "My ear." In the next moment, he reacted instantly. He covered his ear with one hand, but all he felt was a warm wetness. His ear had been directly cut off by Nie Tian. "Third Young Master, this..." The other swordsmen were also shocked. When they came to their senses, they all sucked in a breath of cold air. They didn't know what to say. Obviously, they hadn't expected that Nie Tian would dare to attack directly. And his attack was so frightening. "Bastard, how dare you sneak attack me?" Ling Hanfeng roared angrily. His entire body's sword aura rose. Following that, streaks of frigid sword intent were released. The surrounding space seemed to have fallen into an ice cellar. Ling Hanfeng's eyes were filled with rage and murderous intent. Chapter 2244. Ling Hanfeng's ear was cut off by Nie Tian, and he was instantly enraged. His eyes were filled with killing intent, and his entire body's sword intent burst out like a raging wave. His sword intent was of a very special attribute. It was an extremely rare ice attribute, and it also contained a trace of wind attribute. In the instant that his sword intent was released, the surrounding temperature suddenly dropped, as if it had become an ice cellar. In the air, one could clearly see ice shards flying everywhere. Bastard, die! The next moment, Ling Hanfeng roared, and an ice sword appeared in his hand, which he slashed out. Instantly, the ice sword intent in the air condensed and turned into a giant ice sword that was thousands of meters long. Like an ice mountain, it directly pressed down on Nye Tian. Be careful! Jun Aoqing saw this, and her face stiffened as she screamed in fear. The few people behind Ling Hanfeng had already retreated to the side, and looked at Nye Tian passionately, as if they could already see the tragic scene of the latter being smashed into meat paste. With this kind of strength, you dare to be arrogant in front of me. You're really looking for death. However, at this moment, Nye Tian only laughed coldly. There was no fear in his eyes, only anger and killing intent. Since Ling Hanfeng wanted to kill him, he obviously wouldn't just wait for death. He stood where he was, his figure like a mountain. His body suddenly shook, and black runes appeared all over his body. His aura instantly rose to the extreme. Proud sword frenzy, kill! Then, he roared, and the star heaven slash appeared in his hand. In the air, he stabbed out. Sword intent surged out like a roaring ocean, rolling and roaring. Kaboom! Crack, crack, crack! The next moment, the giant ice sword in the air was hit, and with a loud bang, it directly shattered, turning into ice cones that filled the sky and scattered in the air. Ling Hanfeng was shocked by the scene in the air, and instantly cried out in fear. However, in the next moment, a violent wave of air directly pressed down, and his whole body was sent flying. Pung! Ling Hanfeng flew thousands of meters in the air, and finally landed. He couldn't stand still, and directly fell down. Third young master! The other swordsmen were stunned by the scene before them. They finally reacted and cried out in unison. Jun Aoqing was even more stunned. Her petite face froze in shock, and her pair of beautiful eyes flickered as she stared at Nye Tian with a look of utter disbelief. She was originally worried that Nye Tian would be injured by Ling Hanfeng. However, she did not expect that Nye Tian's strength was beyond her imagination. Impossible! And at this moment, Ling Hanfeng suddenly roared and jumped up from the ground. There was blood at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were like those of a venomous wolf, shining with a cold and sinister light. You can still stand up? When Nye Tian saw this, the corner of his mouth twitched. He smiled coldly and said, "It seems that the sword just now was not strong enough." In the clash of swords, Ling Hanfeng was only injured, but not severely injured. This was not because his martial body was strong, and his strength was strong, but because Nye Tian had held back. Just now, Jun Aoqing was too close, so Nye Tian did not dare to use too much strength, for fear of hurting her. Moreover, he was not very clear what Ling Hanfeng's identity was. If he acted rashly, he was afraid that he would attract unnecessary trouble. "Little bastard, you've angered me!" Ling Hanfeng let out a fierce roar, and his eyes turned crimson. A terrifying sword intent surged around his body, and actually caused the surrounding space to be covered with a faint layer of frost. "Third young master, you!" When the other swordsmen saw this, their faces turned pale and they were speechless. Oh no, he's going to use the power of his bloodline. At the same time, Jun Aoqing's face also trembled, and she cried out in shock. Ling Hanfeng was not only strong, but also had a powerful bloodline in his body. "Nye Tian, let's go." Jun Aoqing reacted, turned around, and formed a space-time sword shadow with her sword. She hurriedly shouted to Nye Tian. "Jun Aoqing, step back." Nye Tian smiled faintly, and waved his hand to signal Jun Aoqing to step back. There was a cold and evil smile on the corner of his mouth, looking sinister and disdainful. "Nye Tian, you." Jun Aoqing was stunned and very anxious. She felt that Nye Tian did not know how strong the power of Ling Hanfeng's bloodline was. If the two of them fought to the death, Nye Tian would be at a great disadvantage. Her mission was to bring Nye Tian to the leader of the Sword Alliance. Of course, she did not want anything to happen to Nie Tian. Moreover, Nie Tian seemed to be fighting for her, which made her even more worried. Don't worry, Nie Tian turned to look at Jun Ouching and said faintly, I'm very strong. His calm voice stunned Jun Ouching. She could feel the domineering confidence in Nie Tian's eyes. It seemed that Nie Tian did not take Ling Hanfeng seriously at all. In reality, that was indeed the case. Ling Hanfeng's strength was indeed not weak, but he was still far from being arrogant in front of Nie Tian. Even though Ling Hanfeng had activated the power of his bloodline, his aura was still far from Yi Chenli's. With Nie Tian's strength, he could even easily crush Yi Chenli. How could he be afraid of Ling Hanfeng? Little bastard, go and die! At this moment, Ling Hanfeng's ruthless voice sounded. Then, his aura soared to the extreme, and he stabbed out with his sword. An ice sword, like a giant dragon, whizzed out and pressed straight towards Nie Tian. 1. The moment the giant ice sword appeared, the surrounding space suddenly tightened, as if letting out a low wail. Nie Tian felt the cold air rushing towards him, but his eyes were extremely determined. There was no fear, but a hint of mockery. Since Ling Hanfeng wanted to play, then Nie Tian would play with him. Godly sword. Without hesitation, Nie Tian stabbed out with his sword. On top of the starry heaven slash, the sword light shone brightly, and a starry sword shadow rushed out. With a roar, it was like an ancient giant beast that swallowed everything. This. Sensing the powerful aura from Nie Tian's sword shadows, the others sucked in a breath of cold air at the same time, and their expressions suddenly changed. Boom! The next moment, the two giant swords collided, and the air suddenly shook. Then, the giant ice sword directly shattered, turned into ice shards, and disappeared in the air. No. Ling Hanfeng's eyes trembled, and he suddenly felt the terrifying sword shadow attack him. He was so scared that he screamed, and his whole body froze on the spot. Never in his wildest dreams had he ever imagined that Nie Tian was actually this powerful. Humph humph. At the same time, Nie Tian laughed coldly. The sword shadow in the air whizzed past, and actually flew past the top of Ling Hanfeng's head. Ling Hanfeng's whole body froze, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. His spine and tailbone were cold, and his teeth kept chattering. Obviously, he was frightened. Third young master, are you okay? The others were stunned for a long time, and then immediately reacted and came to Ling Hanfeng's side. I'm not dead. Ling Hanfeng finally reacted, his voice trembling, and his tense nerves instantly collapsed. And at this moment, he felt heat between his legs, and then the air was filled with the smell of urine. Chapter 2245. Humph. Your courage is nothing compared to your arrogance. Nie Tian glanced at Ling Hanfeng with disdain and sneered. Ling Hanfeng was so scared that he peed his pants. This was something that even Nie Tian was surprised about. This guy was so arrogant just now that he wished he could walk on 3 legs. Now, he was actually so scared. The change before and after was nauseating. This kind of coward still had the face to propose marriage to Jun Ouching every year. He was really shameless. Nie Tian, don't kill him. At this moment, Jun Ouching reacted and quickly stepped forward to stop Nie Tian. She thought that after Nie Tian defeated Ling Hanfeng, he would kill the latter. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, if I wanted to kill him, would he still be able to stand up? From the beginning, he didn't plan to kill Ling Hanfeng. He just wanted to teach the latter a lesson. He had just arrived at the Sacred Heaven Sword League and didn't know who Ling Hanfeng was. If he killed him rashly, it would be very troublesome. Jun Ouching looked at Nie Tian in surprise, and her eyes slowly changed. At this moment, she realized that Nie Tian was far more terrifying than she had expected. Maybe he really can break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. At a certain moment, a thought suddenly appeared in Jun Ouching's mind, but it dimmed in the blink of an eye. She thought, even I can't break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal, how can he? Although she said this in her mind, her impression of Nie Tian had changed a lot. At this moment, Nie Tian took a step forward and directly came to Ling Hanfeng's side. What do you want? Ling Hanfeng was so scared that his face was as white as paper. He didn't even dare to look up at Nie Tian. Ling Hanfeng, you still haven't apologized to Jun Aoqing, Nie Tian said with a calm face, a faint smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. Ling Hanfeng's face stiffened, and he was extremely embarrassed. What, you're not willing? Nie Tian laughed and his face instantly darkened. His eyes were like a wolf's as he stared at Ling Hanfeng. Willing, I'm willing. Ling Hanfeng was so frightened that his body trembled, and he said repeatedly. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said calmly, if you're willing to apologize, then apologize. Miss Aoqing, everything before was my fault, I'm sorry. Ling Hanfeng bowed slightly towards Jun Aoqing, his eyes no longer daring to look around as he said in a low voice. Your voice is too soft, I can't hear you. Nie Tian frowned and said loudly. At this time, Jun Aoqing had already come to Nie Tian's side. She quietly tugged at him, hinting that it was enough. Miss Aoqing, everything is my fault, I'm sorry, please forgive me. Ling Hanfeng swallowed his saliva, and hurriedly raised his voice. That's more like it. Nie Tian smiled in satisfaction and then said, Ling Hanfeng, then in the future, do you still want to propose marriage to Jun Aoqing? I don't dare anymore. Ling Hanfeng waved his hands repeatedly, and his body subconsciously retreated. But his eyes were extremely vicious, and he was thinking about how to take revenge. Jun Aoqing looked at Nie Tian, and felt a warmth flow through her heart, and her face involuntarily blushed. However, at this time, a sharp and mocking voice suddenly sounded, and then a figure descended and appeared in front of Nie Tian and the others. Nie Tian's gaze slightly focused, and he looked at that figure. It was a man, but he was very flirtatious. His clothes were actually pink, and his lips were painted with thick lipstick. He held a pink handkerchief in his hand, and was covering his mouth as he laughed, his charming eyes staring at everyone. Ling Hanfeng, aren't you usually quite manly? Why are you so cowardly today? You've been beaten to such a state, the man in pink said. His voice was soft, and it sounded very cloying. You damned ladyboy! Shut up! Ling Hanfeng was immediately angered by the man in pink's mockery, and reprimanded him wildly. You've been beaten by someone, why are you getting angry at me? The man in pink screamed, his face full of dissatisfaction. Nie Tian, who was at the side, really wanted to vomit. He turned around and said to Jun Aoqing, let's go. Jun Aoqing nodded and prepared to leave. Wait. But at this time, the man in pink laughed coldly, and stared at Nie Tian with his small eyes. With a provocative expression, he said, You're the person that Lord Alliance leader found, right? So what if I am? Nie Tianling replied coldly. He really couldn't stand the man in pink's voice. If he heard it too much, he would definitely have nightmares. Nie Tian, his name is Luo Sanfeng, and he's the son of the Rakshasa sword sect master. The Rakshasa sword sect is the strongest among the 7 major sword sects of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance. Jun Aoqing seemed to be worried that Nie Tian would do something bad, so she transmitted a message to him. The Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance was formed by the 7 major sword sections. The Rakshasa sword sect was the strongest, and Luo Sanfeng was the 3rd son of the sect master. Ling Hanfeng belonged to the Lingyun sword sect, and the Lingyun sword sect was second only to the Rakshasa sword sect. Nie Tian nodded slightly. Of course, he knew what Jun Aoqing was worried about, so he transmitted a message, Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. You brat, you're quite blunt with your words. I like it. Luo Sanfeng covered her mouth and laughed, and she actually winked at Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he immediately retched, almost vomiting. The lethality of this guy's winking was too strong, and ordinary people really couldn't bear it. If you don't have anything else, please step aside. Nie Tian really couldn't stand Luo Sanfeng, so he directly said, "Of course there's something." Luo Sanfeng smiled charmingly. She actually swayed her small waist and walked over. Her eyes stared straight at Nie Tian and she said, "Little handsome, you just came to the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance, so you must be very unfamiliar with this place. Why don't you let me accompany you and help you familiarize yourself with this place?" Nie Tian frowned and endured the disgust in his chest. He said cold, "No need." Then, he directly pulled June Ouching and prepared to leave. However, at this moment, Luo Sanfeng screamed, and her eyes instantly became cold. She said sternly, "Brat, I'm willing to accompany you, and that's giving you face. Don't be ungrateful." Ling Hanfeng and the others saw this scene, and their eyes couldn't help but heat up, as if they were looking forward to something. They knew that Luo Sanfeng's strength was very terrifying. From the point of view of men and women, Luo Sanfeng was indeed very strange. However, her strength was extremely terrifying. Among the entire younger generation of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance, Luo Sanfeng's strength could definitely be ranked in the top 10. If Luo Sanfeng and Nie Tian fought, it would be very exciting. Seeing that Luo Sanfeng was angry, June Ouching's face couldn't help but sink, and a worried expression appeared on her face. "I'm sorry, I like to be ungrateful," Nie Tian turned around and said cold to Luo Sanfeng. Chapter 2246. Luo Sanfeng's eyes were as cold as ice and filled with hostility, giving off a strong sense of oppression. Nie Tian looked at Luo Sanfeng and said, "Whether I have the strength or not, we'll know after we try." At this moment, he decided not to endure it anymore. This Luo Sanfeng was obviously looking for trouble. If Nie Tian continued to endure it, he would become sick. "Challenge me?" Luo Sanfeng's eyes trembled, and the hostility in her eyes intensified. In the entire Sacred Heaven Sword Union, there were not many people who dared to challenge her. Nie Tian. June Ouching was very nervous at this moment and subconsciously pulled Nie Tian. She knew that Luo Sanfeng's strength was far beyond Ling Hanfeng's. Nie Tian could defeat Ling Hanfeng, but it didn't mean that he could defeat Luo Sanfeng. "It's fine, trust me." Nie Tian smiled faintly and signaled June Ouching to step back. June Ouching looked at Nie Tian's eyes and felt the strong confidence in the latter's eyes. Her heart couldn't help but tremble. She had never seen such a confident look. It was hard to imagine that a person's eyes could be so confident, especially when Nie Tian's strength was far below Luo Sanfeng's. "Sister Ouching, the next battle will be very fierce. It's better for you to step back." At this moment, Luo Sanfeng's eyes swept across June Ouching and laughed. "If I hurt you later, my second brother will not be happy." "Luo Sanfeng, don't talk nonsense. Whether I get hurt or not has nothing to do with Luo Er." June Ouching roared with an angry face. "Sister Ouching, don't say that." Luo Sanfeng smiled charmingly. "If my second brother hears this, he will be hurt. My second brother said that in this lifetime, he will only marry you." "Luo Sanfeng, shut up!" June Ouching shouted angrily. She wanted to personally tear Luo Sanfeng's mouth. Nie Tian, who was watching from the side, already understood. It seemed like Ling Hanfeng wasn't the only one in the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance who had taken a fancy to June Ouching. Without waiting for Luo Sanfeng to speak again, Nie Tian took a step forward and said coldly, "His ears aren't working, and it seems like your mouth isn't working either. Should I give you a treatment?" "Stinking brat, you dare to say that this old lady's mouth isn't working? You're courting death." Luo Sanfeng roared, and a flexible sword appeared in her hand, releasing a sinister sword intent. "A person who likes to fart has a fart mouth. Isn't that useless?" Nie Tianling laughed, his eyes cold and contemptuous. "You have a sharp tongue. You're courting death." Luo Sanfeng couldn't bear it any longer. With a low roar, the flexible sword in her hand stabbed out diagonally. Suddenly, a black sword shadow whistled out, attacking Nye Tian. That sword shadow was very strange. There were actually black runes surging on it, looking like many small black snakes. It was extremely terrifying. In the next moment, a strange scene occurred. In midair, the dark sword shadow morphed into a huge black snake, which opened its bloody mouth and bared its fangs. Then, it pounced towards Nye Tian with a sinister look, as if it was going to swallow Nye Tian whole. Interesting. Facing the giant black snake, the corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched. Immediately, his body shook, and a crimson sea of lightning appeared behind him. The majestic dragon aura instantly filled the space within a radius of 10,000 meters. Roar! In the next moment, in the crimson sea of lightning, a giant crimson dragon appeared and roared at the sky, like thunder from the 9 heavens. So powerful! Ling Hanfeng and the others had already retreated tens of thousands of meters away. When they saw the giant crimson dragon from afar and felt the mighty dragon aura in the space, they exclaimed in unison. How could they have ever imagined that Nye Tian would be able to unleash such terrifying dragon aura? Only now did Ling Hanfeng realize that the gap between him and Nye Tian wasn't just 1 or 2 points, but millions and millions of points. Just now, Nye Tian had clearly held back. Otherwise, even if Ling Hanfeng had 1,000 lives, he would have long since been dead. Rumble! Just then, the crimson dragon rose up into the air, its dragon aura rumbling and roaring. Even the space around it seemed to be trembling. Nye Tian's eyes widened in surprise. This was his first time using the Paragon Dragon Meridian since becoming a paramount god. Not even he could have guessed that the Dragon Meridian would be this strong. The power of the Paragon Dragon bloodline is several times stronger than before. Such a huge improvement must have something to do with the Saint Chi, Nye Tian speculated, his eyes filled with joy. Fat Cat had said that the Sage Aura would bring great benefits to Nye Tian. This was the second time Nye Tian had tasted the benefits of the Sage Aura. Not only did the Sage Aura greatly improve his martial body, but it also improved his Paragon Dragon Meridian. Rumble! In the next moment, the Black Serpent and the Crimson Dragon collided head-on. A deafening explosion rang out, and boundless power surged out, wreaking havoc in the space. The giant black snake only lasted for a split second before it crumbled into pieces. The Crimson Dragon tumbled down toward Luo Sanfeng like a mountain. Ah! Luo Sanfeng shrieked when she sensed the danger. Her eyes were filled with unconcealable fear. But at this moment, the Crimson Dragon suddenly raised its head, and its body rolled up into the sky, soaring straight into the clouds. Luo Sanfeng was stunned. She looked up at the Crimson Dragon with a blank expression on her face. Whoosh! At that moment, there was a piercing sound in the air, and the shadow of a sword flew past. Before Luo Sanfeng could react, he felt a heart-wrenching pain coming from the corner of his mouth. Ah! He screamed. Only then did he realize that the corner of his mouth had been torn open, and blood had dyed half of his face red. The wound on his face had split open from the corner of his mouth to his cheek. It looked terrifying. Luo Sanfeng suddenly understood. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he couldn't speak clearly. He had never thought that Nye Tian would actually tear half of his mouth open with a sword. This method was too vicious. At that moment, Ling Hanfeng and the others were completely stunned. They looked at Nye Tian with trembling eyes, not knowing how to express the shock in their hearts. How could they have imagined that such a powerful Luo Sanfeng would be defeated by Nye Tian just like that? And everyone could tell that Nye Tian didn't want to kill Luo Sanfeng. Otherwise, Luo Sanfeng wouldn't even have a corpse left. Just like with Ling Hanfeng, Nye Tian just wanted to teach Luo Sanfeng a lesson. A little worm wants to fight a dragon? What a joke! Nye Tianling looked at Luo Sanfeng coldly and said in a low voice, I ripped your mouth open to give you a reminder. Chapter 2247. Luo Sanfeng stood rooted to the ground, looking at Nye Tian with trembling eyes, his eyes full of disbelief. He had never dreamed that Nye Tian would be so terrifying. How could an early-stage paramount god, whose sword Tao was only at the elementary unity of sword and martial arts, have such terrifying power in his body? Nye Tian had defeated him without even using his sword. That surging draconic energy completely crushed Luo Sanfeng. Speaking of which, Luo Sanfeng wasn't weak at all. In fact, he was very strong. He was a late-stage paramount god, at the peak of the unity of sword and martial arts, but his overall battle prowess was far stronger than Ling Hanfeng's. Unfortunately, Luo Sanfeng's aura was still a bit weaker than Yi Chenli's, who was at the same level as him. If Nye Tian could crush Yi Chenli, then he could crush Luo Sanfeng too. Luo Sanfeng looked at Nye Tian, his eyes filled with shock. Only now did he realize that the one who didn't know how to appreciate favors wasn't Nye Tian, but him. Nye Tian. Jun Aoqing was stunned for a long time before she finally reacted. She came to Nye Tian's side and called out to him, then looked at Luo Sanfeng and Ling Hanfeng, seemingly very sympathetic. Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng, one had his ear cut off by Nye Tian, and the other had his mouth torn open by Nye Tian. Both were very tragic. Wasn't Nye Tian's method a bit cruel? Nye Tian's gaze swept over Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng, but he was very calm. His method looked very bloody, but it was actually very merciful. His strength crushed Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng, but he only taught them a small lesson. He didn't kill them, and he didn't even seriously injure them. If this wasn't merciful, then what was? If it were either Ling Hanfeng or Luo Sanfeng, as long as they could defeat Nye Tian, they would probably kill Nye Tian without hesitation. Jun Aoqing, let's go. Nye Tian didn't want to waste any more time. He turned to look at Jun Aoqing and said with a faint smile. Jun Aoqing nodded slightly. The way she looked at Nye Tian had obviously changed. At this moment, the thought that had flashed through her mind gradually became clear. She vaguely felt that perhaps Nye Tian was the one who could break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. If the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal could be broken, it would be great news for the entire Sacred Heaven Sword Union. The Sacred Heaven Sword Union had been established for millions of years, and countless genius swordsmen had tried to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal, but they all failed without exception. Now, the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance's Alliance Master had spent a lot of effort to find Nye Tian. Could he break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal? Jun Aoqing didn't know how her grandfather knew about Nye Tian, but she started to feel that her grandfather's decision was correct. Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing didn't hesitate and directly stepped into the stone door between the two stone pillars. As soon as the two of them entered the stone door, they disappeared. This stone gate was a space-time gate that led directly to the Sacred Heaven Sword Union's territory. Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng watched as Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing left, not daring to move. A long time after Nye Tian and Luo Sanfeng's figures disappeared, the two of them let out a long sigh. Their nervous expressions instantly turned cold. Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng looked at each other, clearly resentful. However, they didn't enter the stone door and directly left. The Rakshasa Sword Sect and Lingyun's Sword Sect weren't in the Cloud Valley Sacred Sky, but somewhere else. The Cloud Valley Sacred Sky was the headquarters of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. There was only one sword sect here, and that was the Sacred Heaven Sword Sect. The reason why Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng appeared here was obviously to test the waters. The result of this test infuriated the two of them. When they returned to their respective sects, they would naturally report everything here to their sect masters. Soon, people from all the major sword sects would gather in the Cloud Valley Sacred Sky. At the same time, Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing's figures appeared in a huge square. Nye Tian looked back at the stone door beside him and said with a faint smile, "Impressive." It was obvious that the stone door behind him was connected to the previous one. One was the entrance and the other was the exit. "Young miss." At this moment, 4 black-robed swordsmen suddenly descended from the sky and directly surrounded Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing. Nie Tian's gaze swept across the 4 black-robed swordsmen, and he was quite surprised. These 4 were all peak paramount god experts, and they were all at the peak of the realm of sword and martial arts as one. He estimated that their strength should be similar to experts like Gui Wu Kuang Sha. And from their actions, it seemed that their status in the Sacred Heaven Sword Union wasn't high. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so respectful to Jun Aoqing. The strength of these 4 people indirectly showed the strength of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. "Where's Grandpa?" Jun Aoqing didn't beat around the bush, and asked directly. "The Lord Alliance Master is waiting in the Pure Heart courtyard. Young miss, please follow me." One of the 4 swordsmen bowed slightly, then turned around and led the way. "Nie Tian, let's go. Don't let Grandpa wait too long." Jun Aoqing nodded slightly and looked at Nie Tian with a faint smile. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and he vaguely felt that there was some change in Jun Aoqing's eyes. But he couldn't tell what the change was exactly. Under the guidance of the 4 black-clothed swordsmen, Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing walked slowly. Along the way, everyone they met cast strange glances at Nie Tian. At the same time, some people would even whisper to each other. "I heard that the Lord Alliance Master invited an extremely talented swordsman to break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. Could it be this kid?" The Lord Alliance Master asked young Miss Jun Aoqing to personally go and save him. This kid came back with young Miss Jun Aoqing, so it should be him. Am I seeing things? This kid is only at the elementary realm of sword and martial arts as one. With such talent, how can he break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal? Yeah, this kid's talent is too trash. Not to mention young Miss Jun Aoqing, he's far from even me. The crowd whispered to each other as they looked at Nie Tian with undisguised contempt. Everyone in the Sacred Heaven Sword Union knew that the Lord Alliance Master invited a swordsman to open the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. But how could they have imagined that this swordsman's talent was so poor? Compared to the other geniuses in the Sacred Heaven Sword Union, he could only be described as trash. Nie Tian heard everyone's discussion, but his expression didn't change at all. "Nie Tian, they don't know the situation. Please don't mind them," Jun Aoqing whispered, worried that Nie Tian would be angry. "I'm fine," Nie Tian said with a faint smile, his face expressionless. He had heard this kind of words too many times. If this could make him angry, he would have been angered to death. It was just that he didn't understand. Why did the Alliance Master have to make it known to everyone if he was invited? Moreover, he was extremely curious about what kind of sword seal the Sacred Heaven Sword seal was. Was it really so difficult to break it? "We're here." After a moment, the 4 black-clothed swordsmen stopped. Chapter 2248. Nie Tian, let's go. Jun Aoqing smiled faintly and took a step forward, preparing to enter the small path. However, at this time, a black-robed swordsman stepped forward and stopped Jun Aoqing. He said respectfully, "Young lady, the Alliance leader has ordered that only young Master Nie Tian is allowed to see him." "What?" Jun Aoqing was stunned for a moment and then shouted, as if she had heard wrongly, "Grandpa doesn't want to see me?" "Yes." The black-robed swordsman nodded slightly in a very respectful manner. "Impossible. You must be lying to me. Grandpa won't see me." Jun Aoqing's face sank as she said coldly. In her heart, her grandpa loved her the most. How could he not see her? "Young lady, this is the Alliance leader's special order. Please don't make things difficult for this subordinate." The black-robed swordsman bowed slightly and said solemnly. Jun Aoqing's beautiful eyes flickered. She still wanted to say something but was stopped by Nie Tian. "Jun Aoqing, since the Alliance leader wants to see me alone, you will have to bear with it for now." Nie Tian looked at Jun Aoqing and said faintly, "All right." Jun Aoqing frowned and finally nodded. The 4 black-robed swordsmen were stunned when they saw this scene. They then raised their heads and looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression. They knew that June Ouching was a very arrogant girl and very willful. Sometimes, even the Alliance leader couldn't control her. But now, June Ouching was actually willing to listen to Nietian. This was too unbelievable. "Young Master Nietian, please." Then, one of the black-robed swordsmen gestured for Nietian to enter. Nietian nodded slightly and glanced at June Ouching before walking into the small path. June Ouching looked at Nietian from afar, and only left when the latter's figure disappeared. She was very curious as to why her grandfather only allowed Nietian to enter. Could it be that he wanted to tell Nietian something secret? Nietian followed the path and soon reached the end. At the end of the path, what appeared in front of him was an elegant and unique little courtyard. Before entering the small courtyard, he could already smell the fresh and elegant fragrance of flowers. "Little friend Nietian, come in." At this moment in the courtyard, a calm voice rang out. It was very calm, but it could not hide its forcefulness. What a deep aura! Nietian frowned. He could sense an aura as vast as the ocean from the other party's voice. He took a deep breath and stepped in. The moment he entered the courtyard, he suddenly felt an extremely terrifying force appear. It was as if it was coming from all directions, making it impossible for him to dodge. He could only endure it. The tremendous pressure was like a giant boulder, causing Nietian's gaze to freeze, and his expression to turn serious. He did not expect the pressure to be this terrifying. Following this, not only did the pressure not weaken, it grew stronger instead. Nietian's body sank slightly, as his legs sank into the ground. His face turned red and purple, and his whole body was enduring an abnormally terrifying power. This energy was boundless and boundless. It was like a mountain that was slowly pressing him into the ground. This is the pressure of sword intent. In the next moment, Nietian sensed that the pressure around him was actually from a strand of sword intent. His pupils shrank involuntarily. He could not imagine that someone's sword intent could be this terrifying. "Nietian, your strength is too weak. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed in you, At that instant, a calm voice could be heard. Following this, a white-shirted figure appeared before Nietian, who was stroking his white beard and staring at Nietian in a mocking manner. Nietian stared at the figure and his eyes began to tremble violently. The figure's aura was boundless, like a boundless ocean, like the vast sky. Just by standing there, he gave off an invisible pressure. Nietian could feel that his opponent was like a vast ocean, while he was like a small ditch. The difference between them was like the difference between heaven and earth, causing him to be extremely shocked. However, he was not discouraged at all. Instead, he was extremely furious. Even if his opponent's strength was much stronger than his, there was no way he could be pressured like this. "Isn't it just a sword intent? Break." Following this, he let out a roar and activated the celestial demon nascent embryo in his body. Bang! 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 Strands of celestial demon energy suddenly erupted and merged with the blood chi and sword intent in his body, forming the celestial demon sword intent. Bang! The moment the celestial demon sword intent gushed out, a terrifying sword aura erupted from Nietian's body and directly shattered the sword intent pressure around him. Nietian's figure moved and leaped out from the ground, standing in front of the white-shirted elder. Amazing! Looking at the furious Nietian, the white-robed old man let out a hearty laugh and said in a loud voice, "The person recommended by that guy is indeed extraordinary." Nietian frowned and looked at the white-shirted elder cold. He asked in a deep voice, "May I know who you are?" "Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance's Alliance Master, Jun Chu Jian." The white-shirted elder smiled faintly with unconcealable joy on his face. The white-shirted elder was none other than the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance's Alliance Master, Jun Ouching's grandfather, Jun Chu Jian. Nietian's eyes narrowed and couldn't help but tremble for a moment. He had already guessed that the person before him was the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance's Alliance Master. However, he didn't understand why the other party would use sword intent to suppress him. Jun Chujian was very powerful. Nie Tian could clearly feel that this person's sword intent was stronger than Anya Minjia and the other two legends of the sword world. It was obvious that Jun Chujian's sword Dao cultivation was above the three legends. Is it strange? Jun Chujian saw through Nie Tian's doubts and smiled. I saved your life and let you break the sacred heaven sword seal. Of course, he wants to test your talent. Moreover, Ai's action didn't do you any harm. On the contrary, he gave you great benefit. Benefits? Nie Tian was stunned and didn't quite understand what Jun Chujian meant. I'll know after I feel your sword intent, Jun Chujian said with a smile. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and immediately felt his own sword intent. His expression stiffened and he was petrified on the spot. After a full 10 seconds, he finally came back to his senses. His sword Dao realm had miraculously improved. From elementary sword martial fusion to intermediate sword martial fusion. The pressure of the sword intent just now had created a very good environment for Nie Tian's sword intent, which inexplicably allowed him to improve his realm. It had to be said that Jun Chujian's sword intent was indeed abnormally strong. Thank you, Alliance Master. Nie Tian came back to his senses and bowed slightly, sincerely expressing his gratitude. Jun Chujian didn't have any malicious intent towards him. Otherwise, there was no reason for Nie Tian to stand still. There's no need to thank I. It's your strong will that forcefully broke through I's pressure of sword intent. Otherwise, your sword Dao realm couldn't have improved at all. Jun Chujian smiled and sized up Nie Tian. Chapter 2249. Alliance Master, is there a problem? Nie Tian noticed that Jun Chujian's expression had become very strange, so he couldn't help but frown and ask. Little fella, you really aren't an ordinary swordsman. Jun Chujian laughed heartily with unconcealable admiration in his eyes. According to Ai's observation, there are several sword intents in your body at the same time. Each of these sword intents is top-notch, comparable to genius swordsmen of the same level. However, when you broke through Ai's sword intent pressure just now, you fused these sword intents together and formed a new sword intent. The power that can promote the fusion of sword intents is very terrifying. It's even stronger than those sword intents. Therefore, the sword intent produced from this is extremely powerful. It's a brand new sword intent that surpasses all other sword intent. Your sword intent, regardless of its level, is definitely the strongest sword intent in terms of sword intent aptitude alone. After that, Jun Chujian smiled happily and said, that fella's eyesight is really good. It seems that he recommended a very good candidate to I. Nie Tian listened to Jun Chujian's words with a face full of doubt. This old man first talked about his sword intent, then praised him, and finally brought out another person. Just what was going on? Nie Tian, are you wondering why I would look for you? Jun Chujian seemed to have seen through the doubt in Nie Tian's eyes and asked with a faint smile. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he thought of something. Ever since he entered the Sacred Heaven Sword League, he had never taken the initiative to say his name. However, the 4 black-clothed swordsmen and the Sacred Heaven Sword League's Alliance Master all knew his name. Obviously, Jun Chujian already had a certain understanding of Nie Tian from another person. In the next moment, the appearance of the mysterious person appeared in Nie Tian's mind. His eyes slightly trembled as he said, "It's him." Yes. Jun Chujian nodded and smiled. Of course, he knew who Nie Tian was talking about. He said, I made a deal with him. I saved you and you helped I break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed as he finally understood what was going on. The reason why Jun Ouching went to save him was that the mysterious man was behind it. The mysterious man and Jun Chujian made a deal. Jun Chujian would save Nie Tian's life, and Nie Tian would help the Sacred Heaven Sword Union break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. However, in Nie Tian's opinion, This deal seemed a little too simple. He vaguely felt that there might be a hidden deal behind the transaction. The mysterious person seemed to have long since known that he would encounter danger in the Thousand Devils Cave, so he arranged everything in advance. Lord Alliance Lord, you should know how powerful the force behind the person who wants to kill me is. Nietian became cold for a moment and said, I'm very curious. You haven't even seen me before, so why do you believe that I can break the sacred heaven sword seal? Although Jun Chujian looked very peaceful and amiable like a grandpa next door, he was the Alliance Lord of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. Since he was the Alliance Lord of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union and controlled the 7 major sword sects, he must be an extremely shrewd person. He definitely knew how powerful the person who wanted to kill Nietian was. However, he didn't even see Nietian's face before agreeing to the deal and sending Jun Ouching to save Nietian. This way of doing things was a little too sloppy. He should be very clear that the matter of Nietian being rescued would definitely be found out, and it would definitely be traced back to him. For a person he had never seen before, he had to offend an unfathomably powerful opponent. This was clearly unwise. With Jun Chujian's shrewdness, he didn't seem like someone who would do such a thing. Nietian, it seems that you've thought about many things for you to ask this question. Jun Chujian smiled calmly and said, Actually, I was also hesitant to save you. However, the person behind you isn't an ordinary person. Since he values you so much, there must be a reason. Most importantly, I owed him a big favor in my early years, so I had no choice but to agree. Then, Jun Chujian nodded with a smile and said, Nietian, do you still have any doubts? Yes. Nietian's eyes flickered as he laughed and said bluntly, It seems to me that the deal between the two of you is too simple. So I feel that there's a hidden deal behind this deal, right? Hearing Nietian's words, Jun Chujian's expression obviously changed, but it returned to normal in an instant. He smiled and said, Nietian, it seems that I underestimated you. You're smarter than I thought. Since you asked, I doesn't have to hide it from you. There's indeed another hidden deal between him and I, but it's not convenient to tell you what the hidden deal is. You don't have to worry. You'll know everything soon. Sure enough, Nietian's heart trembled. Although he had some guesses, he was still surprised when he confirmed it. He really wanted to know what kind of shocking deal there was between the mysterious man and Jun Chujian. Nietian didn't care. Anyway, he would know everything sooner or later. At this moment, he had a more important question in his mind. Lord Alliance Leader, I have a question, but I don't know if I should ask. After thinking for a while, Nietian's eyes flickered as he said, If you want to ask, just ask. There's no need to be afraid. Jun Chujian said with a smile. Nietian nodded. He took a deep breath and said, Lord Alliance Leader, to tell you the truth, I've only met that mysterious senior a few times. And I'm not from the land of the abandoned. I came from another domain. I'm very confused. Who is that mysterious senior? Why does he want to help me? After saying that, Nietian stared at Jun Chujian with burning eyes, looking forward to the latter's answer. In fact, this question had been bothering Nietian for a long time, but he hadn't found the right person to ask. Jun Chujian seemed to be very familiar with the mysterious man. That was why he thought of asking Jun Chujian. As expected, Nietian, you still asked this question after all. Jun Chujian looked at Nietian, but his eyes flickered. He couldn't help but shake his head and said, It seems that he really found the right person. What do you mean? Nietian saw that Jun Chujian's expression was very strange. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly. However, in the next moment, he understood and his expression changed. The mysterious man knew that he would ask this question. Nietian, your wisdom far exceeds I's expectations. Jun Chujian regained his composure and said with a faint smile, You're right. He knew that you would ask me this question. And he already gave the answer to I. Do you want to know what he said? Chapter 2250. Nie Tian didn't expect that his every move had been predicted by the mysterious man. Even the question was within the mysterious man's expectations. Even so, he still wanted to know what the mysterious man had said to Jun Chujian. Jun Chujian stared at Nie Tian with glowing eyes. He then opened his palm and a ball of light appeared. Nie Tian looked at the ball of light, but he could only see the flowing light. Nie Tian, this is the image he left for you. Only your divine sense can enter it. Jun Chujian smiled and handed the ball of light to Nie Tian. Nie Tian took the ball of light. He couldn't help but tremble. He then glanced at Jun Chujian. The latter nodded with a smile. He didn't hesitate anymore. He sent his divine sense into the ball of light. Where am I? In an instant, Nie Tian's divine sense seemed to have entered a strange world. There was nothing but endless starlight around him. This is the original starry holy world. At this moment a voice was heard. Then, a ball of light appeared in front of Nie Tian. It was the mysterious man. The original starry holy world? Nie Tian was stunned. The shock in his heart was written all over his face. He couldn't imagine that his divine sense had come to the legendary sacred world. Nie Tian, don't be nervous. What you see is just an illusion of the starry holy world, the mysterious man said. The starry holy world no longer exists. This. Nie Tian was stunned. He didn't know what to say. A sacred world no longer existed. To him, such a thing was too terrifying. Nie Tian, it's too early to tell you this. The mysterious man smiled and continued. It's normal for you to have doubts about my identity. If you believe me directly, it means that you're a fool. I've warned you not to trust any stranger. To you, I am a stranger, am I not? As he spoke, the mysterious man looked at Nie Tian. The corners of his mouth twitched, revealing a mysterious and strange smile. Senior, what are you trying to say? Nie Tian became cold and asked with a frown. Nie Tian, release the heaven-shrouding totem. The mysterious man smiled and said. Sky-shrouding totem. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and his eyes suddenly trembled. He didn't expect the mysterious man to know about the shrouding sky totem. After pondering for a while, Nie Tian did not hesitate. His figure shuddered slightly as streams of star force burst out from his body, together with the heaven-shrouding totem. Heaven-shrouding totem, my old friend. Long time no see. When the mysterious man saw the totem, his gaze suddenly became mysterious. He spoke in a clear voice, as if he was talking to an old friend he hadn't seen for a long time. Nie Tian was stunned and puzzled. It seemed that the mysterious man was very familiar with the heaven-shrouding totem. Just at the next moment, a strange scene happened. The heaven-covering totem suddenly began to spin in the air. Totem after totem began to fold, quickly turning into a humanoid figure. This. Nie Tian was stunned by the scene in front of him, and his expression was one of shock. He had never known that the heaven-shrouding totem could turn into a human figure. After the heaven-shrouding totem turned into a human figure, the star force became much stronger. The powerful totem's aura was even more powerful, giving people an indescribable shock. Following that, another shocking scene occurred. Master! The human figure formed by the heaven-shrouding totem came to the mysterious man's side, bowed slightly and said. Nie Tian was shocked by the scene in front of him. His eyes suddenly narrowed, and his whole body froze as if he was struck by lightning. It's been so many years. I didn't expect to see you again. The mysterious man smiled and took a step forward. The heaven-shrouding totem covered his whole body like clothes. Nie Tian was petrified on the spot. After a dozen seconds, he finally reacted. Everything that happened in front of him was too shocking. He couldn't believe it at all. The heaven-shrouding totem suddenly turned into a human figure and spoke, as if it had its own consciousness. If he didn't have a little rationality left, he would even think that he was in someone's illusion. Senior, what's going on? Forcing himself to calm down, Nyetian asked. Nyetian, if I tell you that the heaven-shrouding totem is actually my original spirit, will you believe it? The mysterious man smiled and looked at Nyetian calmly. The heaven-shrouding totem is your original spirit? Nyetian's eyes widened in disbelief. He had always thought that the heaven-shrouding totem was born from the star raw stone. But now, the mysterious man said that the heaven-shrouding totem was his original spirit. How could Nyetian believe it? Senior, you're not joking, right? Nyetian sucked in a deep breath and asked woodenly. Do I look like I'm joking? The mysterious man smiled faintly and said, Nyetian, I know that it's hard for you to believe everything in front of you. But I want to tell you, all of this is real. The heaven-shrouding totem is indeed my original spirit. Huff, huff, huff. Nyetian exhaled 3 mouthfuls of foul air in succession and said, If the heaven-shrouding totem is an original spirit, why does it have its own consciousness? In theory, anything could become an original spirit. Although the heaven-shrouding totem was a little weird, it was also acceptable. Nyetian himself still had an original spirit, which was a coffin. But original spirits were all attached to martial artists and could not have their own consciousness. But just now, the human figure condensed by the heaven-shrouding totem spoke to the mysterious man. This undoubtedly showed that the heaven-shrouding totem was something with its own consciousness. Can't original spirits have their own consciousness? The mysterious man smiled and said, Nyetian, don't you also have an original spirit with its own consciousness? Nyetian's gaze trembled, and his brows furrowed into a ball. He did have an original spirit with its own consciousness, the 9th extreme chaos beast. He did not expect that the mysterious man even knew that the 9th extreme chaos beast had its own consciousness. Nyetian instantly felt that he was transparent in front of the mysterious man, with no secrets to speak of. But he knew nothing about the mysterious man. If the heaven-shrouding totem is your original spirit, then why did it appear in my body? Taking another deep breath, Nyetian asked in a low voice. Everything in front of him was beyond his imagination. He tried to find a breakthrough point to help him understand everything. Because I am a star emissary. At this time, the mysterious man's gaze suddenly trembled, and a strange light surged in his eyes, burning and intense. Star emissary? Nyetian was stunned. He had no idea what the mysterious man was talking about. And at this time, the mysterious man suddenly took a step forward and knelt on one knee in front of Nyetian. Senior, what are you doing? Nyetian was shocked. He did not expect the mysterious man to suddenly kneel. Chapter 22:51. Nyetian stared blankly at the mysterious man. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say a word. Everything that was happening in front of him was too confusing, and he was completely confused. The mysterious man had said that the totem was his nascent spirit. Now, he was kneeling in front of Nyetian, calling himself a star emissary and calling Nyetian the Star Lord. Just what was going on? Senior, are you sure you haven't mistaken me for someone else? Nyetian stood rooted to the spot for a long time. Then, with a grim expression, he said, I have nothing to do with the star domain lord you mentioned. As he spoke, Nyetian gestured for the mysterious man to stand up. Nyetian, you are the one chosen by the primal star stone. The mysterious man stood up slowly, his expression returning to normal. You are not the Star Lord yet, but you will become one in the future. Primal star stone? Upon hearing these words, Nyetian's pupils contracted slightly as he asked, Are you saying that because I have origin star stones in me, I'm the star god Sex Saint Lord? Yes. The mysterious man nodded. The primal star stone is the cornerstone of the Star Lord Holy World. The one chosen by it is the Star Lord Holy World. Nyetian was speechless. He suddenly remembered something. Senior, didn't you just say that the Star Lord Holy World doesn't exist anymore? Then there shouldn't be a Star-Lord Holy World, right? The mysterious man's expression turned solemn when he heard Nietion's words. The Star-Lord Holy World doesn't exist anymore, but the primal star stone still exists. You are the one chosen by the cornerstone of the Star-Lord Holy World. You will inherit the will of the previous Star-Lord Holy World and rebuild it. Nietion's eyes lit up as he exclaimed, "Rebuild the Star Saint realm?" The mysterious man's words were too big for him to accept. He was just a weakling who had just become a paramount god. The mysterious man was asking him to rebuild the Star-Lord Holy World. Was this a joke? Up until now, he still couldn't figure out what was going on in front of him. Nietion, rebuilding the starry sky holy realm is your responsibility. You can't shirk it. The mysterious person looked at Nietion with steely eyes and a solemn expression. Nietion's eyes flickered. He felt that his mind was a little empty, and he couldn't think straight. He felt that he had inexplicably gained a sacred and great identity, the Star Saint Lord. Because of this identity, he had to rebuild a sacred world. Moreover, this matter was his responsibility, and he could not shirk it. This joke was a little too much, and Nietion couldn't accept it. Nietion, there are some things that cannot be avoided. At this moment the mysterious man spoke again. It's just like how I can't escape my identity as the starry sky messenger. I will stay by your side and protect you with my life. Nietion let out a long sigh. What the mysterious man said was too big. He needed time to accept it slowly. But he already understood the gist of the story. A long time ago, there had been a Star-Lord Holy Realm, and the starry sky primal stone was its foundation. But for some unknown reason, the Star-Lord Holy Realm no longer existed, and the starry sky primal stone disappeared along with it. Then, due to a strange combination of factors, the starry sky primal stone chose Nietion and became one with Nietion. Because of this, Nietion had become the Star Saint Lord and shouldered the responsibility of rebuilding the Star-Lord Holy Realm. Actually, Nietion wasn't running away from anything. He just felt that rebuilding a sacred world was too far away for him. He was only an early-stage paramount god, and he couldn't even see the threshold of becoming a saint. Given his strength, how could he rebuild a sacred world? Don't worry, Nietion. The mysterious man seemed to have guessed what Nietion was thinking. Your mission now is to live well. As long as you live, there is hope to rebuild the Star-Lord Holy Realm. We've waited for millions of years. Of course we'll keep waiting. Nietion nodded slightly. Since things had come to this, he had no choice but to accept it. Suddenly, something occurred to him. He looked at the mysterious man and asked, "Senior, if, and I say if, I die, does that mean there's no hope to rebuild the Star-Lord Holy Realm? Do you want to hear the truth?" The mysterious man asked with a laugh. "Of course." Nietion nodded, his eyes burning. "No." The mysterious man's eyes narrowed. "If you die, the starry sky primal stone will continue to exist, and it will continue to search for the next suitable person to be the Star Saint Lord. The starry sky primal stone will accompany the chosen person as they grow, until that person becomes the true Star Saint Lord." Nietion's face darkened when he heard the mysterious man's words. So he wasn't that special or important. The starry sky primal stone was the most important thing in rebuilding the Star-Lord Holy Realm. As long as the starry sky primal stone existed, it would continue to search for the next Star Saint Lord. Nietion suddenly felt like he had been used by the starry sky primal stone. "Nietion, do you know how long the Star-Lord Holy Realm has been destroyed?" The mysterious man suddenly looked at Nietion and asked with a strange look in his eyes. "I don't know." Nietion shook his head. "Almost 5 million years," the mysterious man said with a nod. "That's a long time," Nietion exclaimed. He hadn't expected that. The mysterious man smiled strangely and asked, "Do you know how many Star Saint Lords the starry sky primal stone has chosen over the past 5 million years?" I don't know. Nye Tian shook his head again. One. The mysterious man stared at Nye Tian with a serious look. You are the only one chosen by the starry sky primal stone in the past 5 million years. Nye Tian went blank for a moment before his eyes flickered. The only one. He had thought that the starry sky primal stone would have chosen many star saint lords. Unfortunately, those who had been chosen had all died. That was why it was his turn now. But now it seemed that he was quite special. After all, he was the only one chosen by the starry sky primal stone in the past 5 million years. Nye Tian, you should know how important you are now. The mysterious man nodded and said, If you die, I'm afraid we'll have to wait another 5 million years. Now that you mention it, I'm quite special. Nye Tian laughed. He couldn't help but feel proud. Sir, did you? The next moment, something occurred to Nye Tian and he asked in surprise, You've lived for 5 million years? The mysterious man had just said that if Nye Tian died, he would have to wait another 5 million years. Didn't that mean the mysterious man had already waited for 5 million years? Could a normal martial artist live for 5 million years? As far as Nye Tian knew, martial artists at the peak of the Supreme God realm could live for 500,000 to 600,000 years. More talented martial artists could live for 200,000 to 300,000 years, but not more than 1,000,000 years. He couldn't believe that the mysterious man had lived for 5 million years. Chapter 2252. Nye Tian was stunned to hear the mysterious man admit that he had lived for more than 5 million years. What he had seen today was far beyond his knowledge. It was a huge shock to him, and at the same time, broadened his knowledge of the world. Star Emissary. Nye Tian suddenly realized something and looked at the mysterious man with a passionate gaze. Sir, you called yourself the first star emissary. Does that mean there are other star emissaries? When the mysterious man knelt before Nye Tian, he called himself the first star emissary. It was an interesting title. It seemed that other than the mysterious man, there were other star emissaries. Also, the mysterious man used the word "we" several times when he spoke. This meant that he had other companions. The mysterious man looked at Nye Tian and nodded. There are 9 star emissaries in total. Our responsibility is to protect the Star Saint and assist him in rebuilding the Star Saint territory. Oh. Nye Tian nodded with a smile and asked, What about the other star emissaries? Where are they? How strong are they compared to you? Nye Tian was overjoyed that there were 9 star emissaries. Judging from the mysterious man's strength, the other 8 were not weak either. If all 9 of them worked together, their combat power would be unimaginably terrifying. I don't know. Unexpectedly, the mysterious man shook his head and said solemnly, When the Star Saint territory collapsed, the 9 star emissaries were lost. I don't know where the others are. Maybe they are still alive, maybe they are dead. Dead? Nye Tian was taken aback. Even star emissaries can die. Of course. The mysterious man smiled at Nye Tian's question. Star emissaries are not immortal. Of course they can die. Nye Tian smiled bitterly. It seemed that he had overthought it. It was not surprising. If even the Star Saint leader could die, then the star emissaries could. Nye Tian was curious. If the other 8 star emissaries were not dead, where would they be now? How strong would they be? Nye Tian, don't think too much. The mysterious man chuckled. The land of the abandoned is still too dangerous for you. When the 3-month deadline is over, you should return to your original territory. What about you? Will you go back with me? Nye Tian's eyes flickered with a hint of desire. If the mysterious man followed him back to the 9 territories, there would be no way to deal with him. The mysterious man shook his head. I must stay in the land of the abandoned. There are many things that I need to do. Star emissary, I have to deal with them. If I interfere, I will make you stronger. Nye Tian nodded. Of course he understood what the mysterious man meant. No matter how beautiful they were, they would be of the land of the emissaries. No matter how beautiful the flowers in the greenhouse were, they were destined to be unable to withstand the blows of the storm. Tian didn't want to be a flower. He wanted to be a towering tree, fearless of any storm. We will meet again soon. The mysterious man felt the determination in Tian's eyes, smiled, and disappeared. We'll meet again soon. Sensing the determination in Tian's eyes, the mysterious man smiled faintly and disappeared. Tian, are you okay? Jun Chujian could not help but ask when he saw the look of shock on Tian's face. Tian, are you alright? Jun Chujian couldn't help but ask when he saw Tian's shocked expression. Tian, are you okay? Jun Chujian could not help but ask when he saw Tian's shocked expression. I'm fine. Tian smiled faintly, and his expression returned to normal. He was a man with a sense of propriety. Since the mysterious man didn't want him to know, he must have told Tian something confidential. Since the mysterious man did not want him to know, he must have told Tian some secret. Tian's mood had stabilized at this time, and his whole person was calm again. He had a vague guess in his heart, but he did not have time to ask the mysterious man. There were 9 star messengers in the primal starstone, and there were 9 galaxies in the galaxy realm. Each level of the 9 galaxies would give birth to something different. The totem in the first galaxy was the primordial spirit of the first star messenger. Was this a coincidence? Did this mean that the other 8 galaxies had an unusual relationship with the other 8 star messengers? Thinking of this, Tian could not help shaking his head. He could not figure out why the primordial spirit of the mysterious man would appear in the galaxy realm. Origin star stones indeed contained too many mysteries, waiting for Tian to unravel them one by one. Alliance Master, tell me about the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. What kind of sword seal is it? Tian asked with a faint smile as he recalled the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. He already knew that there was another secret deal between the mysterious man and Jun Chujian. But right now, he still had to pay attention to the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. Since Jun Ouching had saved him, he naturally had to find a way to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. Tian, come with me. Jun Chujian smiled faintly. Then, his figure moved, and a powerful aura directly shrouded Tian. Of course, Tian did not resist and followed Jun Chujian straight up to the sky. The 2 figures moved quickly, and a moment later, they arrived in the sky filled with mist. Tian could vaguely see a towering mountain peak in the air in front of him, like a giant that could prop up heaven and earth. Jun Chujian smiled faintly and then waved his hand. A majestic sword intent was released like a gust of wind, dispersing all the mist within a radius of tens of thousands of meters. Tian gazed off into the distance, and saw with great clarity a towering mountain peak piercing through the clouds like an enormous sword that had been stabbed into the ground. The Sacred Heaven Sword Seal is on Mount Xingtian. Jun Chujian's eyes narrowed as he pointed at the mountain in front of him. Tian nodded slightly and took a step forward, getting closer to Mount Xingtian. At this moment, he could clearly feel that the surrounding space was filled with a vast and boundless sword intent. This sword intent was so terrifying that it made Tian feel like breathing was being suppressed. At this moment, he was at least 10,000 meters away from Mount Xingtian. What a strong sword intent aura! Tian could not help but exclaim. His eyes were fixed on the highest point of Mount Xingtian. He saw a sword intent seal suspended above the peak, releasing a majestic sword intent to suppress the surroundings. Without a doubt, the sword intent seal suspended in the air was the legendary Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. Tian carefully sensed the sword intent aura in the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal, and his expression constantly changed. He had never seen such a powerful sword intent aura before. In the sword seal, there seemed to be a wild beast condensed from sword intent. It was extremely terrifying and could devour anyone who came close. The terror of the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal exceeded Nie Tian's expectations. Chapter 2253. Nie Tian, the sword intent seal floating in the air, is the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. Jun Chujian came to Nie Tian's side and stared at the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. Nie Tian slightly nodded in shock. He felt that the sword intent in the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was somewhat different from the other sword intent. Not only was the sword intent in the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal powerful, but it also contained a very mysterious aura. This aura was something that Nie Tian had never felt before in any other sword intent. It felt like the aura in the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was a super sword intent that transcended all other sword intents. Nie Tian was very puzzled. The Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was very unusual. It seemed that it wouldn't be easy to break this sword seal. Nie Tian, what do you feel? Jun Chujian looked at Nie Tian and asked in a deep voice. Nie Tian explained what he felt in his heart and finally said, "Why is the sword intent in the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal different from other sword intents? It's so strange. Rumor has it that the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was left behind by a mysterious swordsman a long time ago, the Sacred Heaven Ancestor." Jun Chujian bitterly smiled and said, "No one knows what level of swordsman the Sacred Heaven Ancestor was at. No one can say how terrifying his sword intent is. The Sacred Heaven Sword Union has been established for nearly 1,000,000 years and has produced countless sword Dao geniuses. But no one has been able to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. This sword seal is like a huge mountain pressing on the Sacred Heaven Sword Union, making it hard for the past Union Masters to breathe." At this point, Jun Chujian couldn't help but sigh and said, "I has been the Union Master of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union for 200,000 years. For the past 200,000 years, I've been dreaming about how to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. But it's a pity that there are so many swordsmen in the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. No matter how talented you are, you can't do anything to the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal." With that, Jun Chujian couldn't help but sigh again. Nie Tian frowned and suddenly looked at Jun Chujian and asked, "Union Master, I want to know what's sealed beneath the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal." "Sword Tomb." Jun Chujian didn't hide it and said, "The Sacred Heaven Sword Seal is actually a gate that leads to the Sacred Heaven Sword Tomb. The Heaven Sword Tomb is a sword Dao tomb left behind by the Saint Era in the Forsaken Land. Rumor has it that there are countless sage-level swordsmen's inheritances in the Sacred Heaven Sword Tomb. It is said that there are countless sword Dao inheritances left by the Heaven Sword clan." As he spoke, Jun Chujian's eyes were filled with unconcealable passion. It was obvious that he desired the saint's sword mound very much. The corner of Nie Tian's lips rose as he finally understood. No wonder Jun Chujian wanted to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal so much. It turned out that it was for the sword Dao inheritance in the Sacred Heaven Sword Tomb. The sword Dao inheritance of the Heaven Sword was a fatal temptation to any swordsman. As long as one could integrate the sword Dao inheritance of the Heaven Sword, it was possible to become a saint with the sword Dao in the future. But no matter how great Jun Chujian's desire was, everything was just a dream before the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was broken. Nie Tian glanced at Jun Chujian and thought, breaking the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal is definitely a great thing for the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. The mysterious person must have given a great condition to Jun Chujian. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let Jun Chujian break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. The benefits of breaking the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal were self-evident for the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. The mysterious person was clearly not someone who was easy to deal with. He must have given a great condition for such a great benefit. Nie Tian now understood why Jun Chujian was willing to risk offending a great enemy to save him. Because breaking the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was too important for the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. Nie Tian, let's leave first. At this moment, Jun Chujian nodded and prepared to leave. Nie Tian nodded in agreement and the two of them left. Breaking the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was a very important matter, and they obviously couldn't do it directly. Moreover, Nie Tian knew that if he tried it directly, he wouldn't be confident of success and would be in great danger. The sword intent contained in the Sacred Heaven sword seal was too powerful, and it could easily backfire on Nie Tian. Very soon, Nie Tian and Jun Chujian returned to the Qingxin little courtyard. Alliance Lord, the sect master of the Rakshasa sect, is here. He's waiting in the heavenly hall. Just when the two of them landed, a voice came from outside the courtyard. He's here so quickly. Jun Chujian had already expected this and smiled. Tell him that I will be here soon. Yes, the person outside the courtyard replied before his aura disappeared. Alliance Lord, since you have something to take care of, I won't disturb you any further. Just arrange a place for me to stay, Nie Tian said with a smile. Nie Tian, the sect master is here for you. How can you not go? Jun Chujian shook his head with a smile. Nie Tian went blank for a moment, confused. You're after me? You're invited by I to break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. The sect masters of the Sacred Heaven Sword Light Alliance obviously want to see you. Jun Chujian smiled. Come with me to meet them. Nie Tian frowned helplessly and could only follow Jun Chujian. Until now, he still didn't know what the 7 major sword sects of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance were. He only knew that the Rakshasa Sword Sect and the Lingyun Sword Sect were the 2 strongest sects among the 7 major sword sections. The sword sect that Jun Aoqing was in should be the Sacred Heaven Sword Sect. The Sacred Heaven Sword Sect was the authentic one among the 7 major sword sects, and the Alliance Lord of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance, Jun Chujian, was a swordsman of the Sacred Heaven Sword Sect. Previously, Nie Tian had already met Luo Sanfeng of the Rakshasa Sword Sect and Ling Hanfeng of the Lingyun Sword Sect. Judging from their attitude towards Jun Aoqing, the relationship between the 7 major sword sects of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union wasn't harmonious. The conflict between the various sword sects should be very deep. Nie Tian followed behind Jun Chujian and couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Vaguely, he felt that something would happen next. A moment later, Jun Chujian and Nie Tian arrived outside the Sacred Heaven Hall. Alliance Lord, long time no see. Before the two of them entered the hall, a powerful voice came out from the hall. It was filled with an extremely violent aura, and it resounded in the space like a clap of thunder. Sect Master Luo. Jun Chujian smiled, and his voice turned into a gentle force in the air, easily dispelling the violent aura in the air. In the next moment, a burly figure in black flew out from the hall and landed heavily in front of Nie Tian and Jun Chujian. Nie Tian looked at this person and couldn't help but be shocked. This person's aura was very powerful, and an extremely violent sword intent surged around him. It circulated in the air, making him look ferocious and violent. What was more frightening was that the sword aura around this person was extremely terrifying, not inferior to the 3 legends. This figure in black was none other than the sect master of the Rakshasa Sword Sect, Roten. Chapter 2254. The Rakshasa sect leader, Roten, suddenly locked his gaze on Nie Tian. His eyes were cold and murderous. If not for Jun Chujian's presence, he might have attacked Nie Tian directly. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Of course, he knew who the son Roten was talking about was. He did not panic. Instead, he raised his brows and said, "Is that your son? I thought it was your daughter?" Jun Aoqing had told Nie Tian that Luo Sanfeng was the son of the Rakshasa sect leader. Therefore, the son that Roten was talking about must be Luo Sanfeng. "Brat, you're courting death." When Roten heard Nie Tian's words, he was instantly enraged. With a roar, he struck out with his palm. An extremely violent palm force surged towards Nie Tian. He knew what kind of person Luo Sanfeng was, but what he hated the most was people calling the latter a woman. Nie Tian's words poked right into his sore spot. How could he not be enraged? The violent palm caused the space to tremble violently as though it was about to be torn apart. When Nie Tian sensed the huge murderous intent coming towards him, his eyes flickered slightly. However, he did not panic. With his strength, it was obvious that he would not be able to fight against Roten. If it was just him, regardless of whether he resisted or not, the result would be the same. He would definitely die. However, he had Jun Chujian by his side. The latter would definitely not let anything happen to him. Roten, how dare you? As expected, Jun Chujian let out a low growl and stretched out his hand. An invisible force appeared and dissolved the violent palm energy in the air like a spring breeze and rain. When Roten saw Jun Chujian make a move, he took a step forward and stared coldly at the latter. He was extremely angry. Roten, you know that Nie Tian is my guest, yet you attacked him in front of me. Are you looking down on me? Jun Chujian growled cold and stared at Roten. Roten's face darkened. He seemed to be thinking about something and did not say a word. Roten, I'm asking you a question. Jun Chujian growled again. There was a faint sword intent surging around him. He was obviously really angry. I dare not. Roten lowered his head and replied. However, his tone was obviously filled with unwillingness and anger. You'd better not. Jun Chujian frowned and said coldly. Then, he didn't say anything else. Nie Tian looked at the two of them and could not help but feel worried. It seemed that the relationship between the 7 major sword sects of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance was more tense than he had imagined. Luo Tong was a member of the 7 major sword sect. Even if he was a sect master, he should still show respect when he saw Jun Chujian, the alliance master. However, in front of Jun Chujian, not only was he not respectful, but he was also very arrogant. He even dared to attack in front of Jun Chujian. Nie Tian could not understand and was very puzzled. He admitted that Roten was very strong. Even if he was not as strong as the 3 legendary swordsmen, the gap should not be too big. However, Jun Chujian's strength should be above Anya Minjia and the others. He could definitely crush Roten. The contrast in strength, coupled with the difference in status, why did Jun Chujian tolerate Roten's arrogance? Jun Chujian indeed looked calm, but since he became the Sword Alliance master, he was, of course, very shrewd. How could a person in a high position be a soft-hearted person? There must be a reason why Jun Chujian tolerated Roten. Roten, you just said that Nie Tian injured your son. What's going on? Jun Chujian looked at Roten and asked with a frown. This brat injured my 3rd son, Luo Sanfeng. Roten pointed at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice. Jun Chujian frowned and seemed very surprised. He turned to look at Nie Tian and asked, Nie Tian, you and Luo Sanfeng don't know each other. Why did you two fight? Let him speak for himself. Nie Tian smiled coolly and looked over at the 2 figures approaching from behind Roten. One of them was Luo Sanfeng, clad in a flirtatious pink dress. Luo Sanfeng walked over leisurely, and beside him was a burly man who looked somewhat similar to him, but was even more boorish, exuding an extremely wild aura. This burly man was Luo Sanfeng's 2nd brother, Luo Eru. Luo Sanfeng had mentioned Luo Eru in the past, and the latter had said that he would never marry anyone but Jun Ouching. Sanfeng, you speak. Luo Tong said heavily when he saw Luo Sanfeng. Yes. Luo Sanfeng nodded. There was still a scar on her mouth. The wound on his mouth had been inflicted by Nie Tian's sword will. Even a late paramount god like him would need several days to heal. League Lord. Luo Sanfeng bowed slightly to Jun Chujian, then glared venomously at Nie Tian. Not long ago, I came looking for Miss Ouching. I only spoke a few words with her, and this brat found me an eyesore, so he ambushed me. He was very vicious. He used his sword will to rip my mouth open. His sword will is very strong. Even now, my mouth still hasn't healed. With that, Luo Sanfeng glared venomously at Nie Tian. Nie Tian couldn't help but shake his head and smile, but he didn't say anything. Luo Sanfeng, you said he ambushed you and ripped your mouth open. Jun Chujian frowned and asked in a cold voice, "Then tell me, why didn't you fight back?" Luo Sanfeng had a reputation for being a weirdo, but he wasn't a pushover. If what he said was true, how could he not fight back? Luo Sanfeng was stunned for a moment, then said, "League Lord, Miss Ouching said that this brat was invited by you to break the sacred heavenly sword seal. How could I dare to hurt him?" Jun Chujian frowned and said, "It seems that you're giving me face, so you didn't fight back. Is that right?" "Yes, that's right." Luo Sanfeng nodded heavily, looking very certain. At this time, Jun Chujian looked at Nie Tian and asked, "Nie Tian, do you have anything to say?" Nie Tian laughed. Then, he fixed his gaze on Luo Sanfeng, a cold light shining in his eyes. Luo Sanfeng couldn't help but tremble when he felt the coldness in Nie Tian's eyes. He subconsciously took a few steps back. He had already seen how powerful Nie Tian was, so he was very afraid of the latter. "Luo Sanfeng, I heard that you have a fart mouth and like to fart with your mouth. The more you fart, the louder it is." Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he laughed and said in a cold voice, "It seems that you haven't remembered the previous lesson." "What? Do you want me to tear the other half of my mouth?" As the cold voice fell, Luo Sanfeng was so frightened that she retreated again, her eyes filled with terror. Nie Tian didn't explain anything because he didn't want to. Luo Sanfeng's words just now were full of loopholes. It was fine to deceive a child, but to deceive Jun Chujian, it was simply a joke. "League Lord, look at how arrogant this brat is. He dares to threaten me in front of League Lord? He simply doesn't put League Lord in his eyes." Luo Sanfeng calmed down and pointed at Nie Tian. Chapter 2255. Luo Sanfeng suddenly sensed the anger in Jun Chujian's eyes. His body trembled and he almost fell. "P-leader, you don't believe me?" His teeth were chattering and his eyes were flickering. He was obviously panicking. "Believe you?" Jun Chujian laughed instead and roared angrily, "Luo Sanfeng, do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? The one who doesn't respect me isn't Nie Tian, it's you. I know very well what kind of person you are. If it's really as you said, you're already being merciful by not killing Nie Tian. How could you let him go? In my opinion, you provoked him, but you're no match for him, so he injured you." After that, Jun Chujian's eyes were extremely cold and his body was releasing a cold aura. What Luo Sanfeng said just now was simply an insult to his judgment. Of course, he knew that the reason why Luo Sanfeng dared to talk nonsense was because of Roten's instruction. The father and son from the Luo family were simply provoking him, the leader of the Sword Alliance. Leader, this. Luo Sanfeng could see that Jun Chujian was really angry. His forehead was covered in sweat and he couldn't help but turn to look at Roten. "Leader, it's fine if you don't believe my son's words. Is there a need to be so angry?" Roten said coldly. His attitude was very Roten. Jun Chujian's face darkened. He looked at Roten with restrained anger in his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Roten, what do you want?" Roten sneered and then locked his eyes on Nie Tian. He said, "I don't care what the truth is, but it's true that my son was injured. It's a great humiliation that his mouth was torn open. This humiliation doesn't just belong to him. It belongs to the Luo family and the entire Rakshasa sword sect. You've humiliated the Rakshasa sword sect. If you don't give me an explanation, I won't let this matter rest." After he finished speaking, Roten's expression became extremely gloomy, and his attitude was overbearing and arrogant. When Nie Tian heard Roten's words, he couldn't help but frown. He did not expect that this person, as the leader of a sect, would speak without boundaries. No wonder Luo Sanfeng was so good at farting. It seemed that her father, Roten, had taught her well. Nie Tian injuring Luo Sanfeng was originally just a small matter. However, Roten refused to let go of this matter. He even publicly slandered Nie Tian, saying that he had humiliated the Rakshasa sword sect. When Nie Tian beat up Luo Sanfeng, He didn't even know what the Rakshasa sword sect was. How could he talk about humiliation? This Roten was obviously trying to pin a big crime on Nyetian. Humiliating the Rakshasa sword sect, this crime is really not bad. Nyetian smiled faintly and said, I originally thought that Luo Sanfeng was the only one with a fart mouth. Only now do I know that this fart mouth is actually the power of bloodline passed down from father to son. An indifferent voice resounded through the air. It was as if many resounding slaps had landed on Luo Tong's face. Damned brat, what did you say? Luo Tong roared. He was like a wild beast that was about to go berserk. His eyes turned scarlet red. He never thought that Nyetian would be so daring to directly insult him in his face. Who was he? He was the leader of the Rakshasa sword sect. Even Jun Chujian did not dare to insult him in his face. Who did Nyetian think he was? He was just a reckless junior. What right did he have to insult him? I said that you're the same as Luo Sanfeng with a fart mouth. Nie Tianling said coldly without the slightest fear. Little bastard, you're courting death. In an instant, Roten was completely enraged. His whole body surged with a terrifying sword momentum. His figure suddenly moved, and the mountain-like sword momentum slashed directly at Nie Tian. The sword momentum shook the sky, and its power was unparalleled. Before it landed, the ground could not bear it and directly cracked. Huh! Nie Tian felt a very terrifying pressure, as if there was a force of 10,000 caddies above his head, causing him to let out a groan. Stop! At this critical moment, Jun Chujian let out a roar and took a step forward. A continuous sword momentum surged out like an endless sea wave. The sword intent that had been suppressing Nie Tian was instantly shattered by the impact. Pfft! Nie Tian suddenly felt the pressure disappear. He took 2 steps back and spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. His tense expression improved a lot. Roten, pay attention to your status. Jun Chujian saw that Nie Tian was injured, and his face immediately darkened. He said cold, Nie Tian is someone that I invited. If you dare to attack him again, don't blame me for being ruthless. His deep voice carried an extremely strong murderous aura. This time, Jun Chujian was really angry. Roten attacked Nie Tian again and again in front of him. This was not only a threat to Nie Tian, but also a disrespect to him, the leader of the Sword Alliance. As the leader of the Sword Alliance, Jun Chujian's dignity was naturally inviolable. Even if he could tolerate Roten, there was a limit. If Roten dared to challenge his tolerance again, he would be forced to turn against him. Roten was forced to retreat again and again. His face was flushed red, and there was finally a trace of fear in his eyes when he looked at Jun Chujian. He seemed to have not expected that Jun Chujian's strength was actually so strong that it exceeded his expectations. After being intimidated by Jun Chujian's strength, Roten calmed down a lot. However, he did not want to stop just like that. He said, Leader, even if this kid is someone that you invited, you can't just let the matter of him humiliating my Rakshasa sword sect go like this. Before Jun Chujian could speak, Nie Tian took a step forward and asked cold, Sect Leader Luo, what do you want? He was a little regretful now. If he knew that Roten was so shameless, he would have just killed Luo Sanfeng. But now, this matter was actually caught by Luo Tong, and he refused to let go no matter what. It's very simple. Roten sneered and said directly, Since you tore my son's mouth, then an eye for an eye. Let him tear your mouth too. As for your humiliation of the Rakshasa sword sect, I'll let you kneel in front of me and kowtow 100 times to show your remorse. When Nie Tian heard Roten's words, his eyes narrowed and he could not help but sneer. If not for Roten's sinister face, he would have thought that this guy was joking. This condition of Roten was really ruthless. Not only did he want to tear Nie Tian's mouth, but he also wanted him to kowtow and apologize. These conditions were all a naked insult to a martial artist and a swordsman. Who did he think Nie Tian was? A little lamb that was at the mercy of others? Sect leader Luo, I think you don't understand the situation at all. Nie Tian's face darkened and he said coldly, Luo Sanfeng was indeed injured by me, but that's because I have the strength. Do you think that with Luo Sanfeng's strength, he really has the qualifications to provoke me? Let me tell you, I'm already being extremely lenient by not killing him just now. Tearing his mouth was just to give him a warning. If I really wanted to make a move, he would have long ended up without a corpse left. Chapter 2256. Nie Tian's eyes were as cold as ice as he glared at Luo Sanfeng, looking like a vicious wolf staring at a little lamb. Luo Sanfeng's eyes widened, and she swayed back and forth, cold sweat pouring down her back. She had long since experienced how strong Nie Tian was, and knew full well how strong he was. Considering how strong he was, trying to make a move against Nie Tian would be like looking to die. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that if Nie Tian simply stood there, he wouldn't even have the courage to make a move. You don't dare to make a move, Sanfeng? When Luo Tong saw Luo Sanfeng's little appearance, he was so scared that his little face turned pale. He couldn't help but let out a low roar, his expression gloomy. Never could he have guessed that Luo Sanfeng would be so afraid of Nie Tian that she didn't even have the courage to make a move. He was very confused. Was Nie Tian really that terrifying? He had long since realized that Nie Tian was only an early paramount god, and his Tao of the sword was only at the mid-level of sword-martial unity. Furthermore, he had only just broken through. Compared to Luo Sanfeng, that level of strength was several levels lower. Given the circumstances, why would Luo Sanfeng be so afraid of Nie Tian? Could it be that Nie Tian was so strong that he could crush Luo Sanfeng? Roten obviously didn't believe that Nie Tian was strong enough to do that. Chuckling cold, he said, So you're not going to admit defeat, boy? Sorry, Nie Tian, can do anything but never admit defeat. Nie Tianling laughed wildly. Roten's expression darkened, and he was just about to say something when he suddenly sensed something, and looked up into the sky. What an arrogant brat! In the next moment, a deep voice was heard in the void, and a black-robed figure descended from the sky. He was middle-aged, tall and slender, with delicate features that made him seem a bit sickly. However, his aura was so strong that he was actually on the same level as Roten's. Brother Ling, you really came at the right time, Roten said, clasping his hands in greeting. Ling Yi. Jun Chujian looked at that person and frowned. He thought to himself, he is here too. The newcomer was none other than the sect lord of the Cloud Sword sect, Ling Yi. Then, two more figures appeared and landed beside Ling Yi. Another one to settle scores. Nie Tian couldn't help but chuckle bitterly to himself. He was very familiar with one of the two. It was Ling Hanfeng, whose ear had been cut off by him. The person next to Ling Yi looked a bit like him, and was most likely his brother. Nie Tian's guess was correct. The person standing beside Ling Hanfeng was none other than his second brother, Ling Hanxing. Alliance Master. Ling Yi still had some manners. He first smiled slightly, bowed slightly to Jun Chujian, and greeted him. Sect Lord Ling, Jun Chujian said, smiling and bowing to Jun Chujian. Jun Chujian smiled faintly, his gaze sweeping across Ling Hanfeng's body, noticing the latter's ears that had yet to fully recover. He immediately guessed that Ling Ye's ears were also Nie Tian's work. He didn't expect Nie Tian to offend the two strongest sword sects the moment he came to the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance. Sect Lord Ling, to be honest, I'm here to seek justice for my son. Ling Yi smiled and locked his gaze on Nie Tian. Brat, you're really arrogant, he said coldly. Sect Lord Ling, you don't have to say any more. Nie Tian smiled and didn't want to listen to Ling Ye's nonsense. I was the one who cut off Ling Ye's ears. If you want to stand up for your son, come. But I have to remind you that Sect Lord Luo has already tried. If you want to make a move against me, you have to see if Sect Lord Ling is willing. Ling Ye's expression darkened. Nie Tian's arrogant attitude was out of his expectations. He turned to look at Roten and noticed the cracked ground under his feet. He immediately understood everything. It seemed that for Nie Tian, Jun Chujian and Roten really fought. After thinking for a while, Ling Yi smiled and said, "Brat, you're looking down on me too much. I'm the sect master. Why would I make a move against a junior?" Ling Ye's words made Roten's expression darken. Ling Yi noticed Roten's expression but didn't care. He continued to look at Nie Tian and said, "Brat, you injured my son. I can't just let this go. Since this is a matter between you juniors, I won't make a move. I'm not an unreasonable person, and you just said that you won't give in. Then we'll deal with this matter in the most direct way." As he spoke, a faint smile appeared on Ling Ye's face. He then looked at his second son, Ling Hanxing, and said, "You fight with him. No matter what the result is, I will not pursue this matter any further. How about it?" Nie Tian's eyes flickered when he heard Ling Ye's words. He didn't think that Ling Yi would be so straightforward. He didn't ask what happened and didn't care how Ling Hanfeng was injured. He directly suggested that Nie Tian and Ling Hanxing fight. After the fight, no matter what the result was, this matter would be over. Nie Tian liked such a straightforward way of dealing with it. Sure. Without any hesitation, Nie Tian agreed. He didn't even look at Ling Hanxing's strength. Jun Chujian's eyes trembled when he heard Nie Tian agree. He knew how terrifying Ling Hanxing was. He wanted to stop the fight, but he didn't make it in time. Ling Hanxing was Ling Ye's second son. Among the younger generation of swordsmen in the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance, he could squeeze into the top 5. Nie Tian was indeed a talented swordsman, but he was too weak. Was he really confident in fighting Ling Hanxing? Straightforward. Ling Yi laughed, but his eyes flickered with a cold light. "Brat, I'll kill you." At this moment, Ling Hanxing took a step forward and said coldly. The cold curve on his lips made him look extremely sinister, as if he was a devil that walked out of hell. Only now did Nie Tian really observe Ling Hanxing. His divine sense swept over the latter, but his expression didn't change at all. Ling Hanxing was a late-stage supreme god, at the peak of the unity of sword and martial arts. He didn't seem to be much stronger than Ling Hanfeng. However, the aura around him was even colder, making people feel a bone-piercing coldness. "I'll wait and see," Nie Tian replied with a faint smile. "No." However, at this moment, a berserk voice rang out. Then, a figure stepped forward and stood in front of Nie Tian. He pointed at him and said in a loud voice, "This brat is mine. Only I can kill him." "HM?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. Looking at the burly figure in front of him, he couldn't help but laugh and tease, "Are you sure you want to kill me?" The person in front of him was a little unexpected to Nie Tian. It was Luo Sanfeng's second brother, Luo Eru. Luo Eru hadn't said a word since he appeared, but now he stood out as if he was very angry and wanted to eat Nie Tian alive. Nie Tian was a little baffled because he could tell that Luo Eru wasn't the kind of person who valued brotherhood. Moreover, when Luo Sanfeng was trembling in fear at Nie Tian, Luo Eru had an indifferent expression. Luo Eru clearly didn't want to kill Nie Tian because of Luo Sanfeng. Chapter 2257. Eru. Second brother. When Roten and Luo Sanfeng saw Luo Eru suddenly speak, they both exclaimed. Obviously, they were also very surprised. "Luo Eru, what do you want to do?" Ling Hanxing obviously didn't want to, so he coldly asked. Luo Eru turned around and glanced at Ling Hanxing and said, "Ling Hanxing, you're not the only one who wants to kill him. I, Luo Eru, came here first. If we want to fight, it should be me first, not you." Ling Hanxing frowned, his eyes swept over Luo Sanfeng, and couldn't help but laugh, and said, "What? Do you want to avenge your third brother?" Luo Eru coldly smiled and said, "His life and death has nothing to do with me. I want to kill this kid because he and Jun Ouching are too close." "Jun Ouching? When Nye Tian heard this name, he couldn't help but frown, and immediately understood. Luo Sanfeng once said that Luo Er wouldn't marry anyone unless it was Jun Aoqing. Luo Sanfeng must have said something to Luo Eru, so the latter thought that there was something between Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing, so he wanted to kill Nye Tian. So it's for Jun Aoqing. Ling Hanqing laughed and then said, "Okay, since that's the case, I'll let you do it this time. I'll let you fight with this kid first. If he can survive in your hands, then I'll kill him." Humph! Luo Er sneered, and his eyes were incomparably cold, and said in a deep voice, "In my hands there will never be a survivor." "I hope so." Ling Hanqing slightly smiled, with a strange look on his face. Nye Tian looked at these two people, and couldn't help but bitterly smile in his heart. These two guys seemed to treat him as a little loach that could be trampled on at will. "Kid, you shouldn't be so close to Jun Aoqing." Luo Er's eyes turned to Nye Tian and coldly said, "Because she is my woman." Nye Tian shook his head with a disdainful smile. He had originally thought that Ling Hanfeng was already shameless enough, but he had never thought that Luo Eru would be even more shameless than him. "Luo Eru, don't speak nonsense. This lady has nothing to do with you." Right at this moment, a clear voice resounded. Then, a figure appeared. It was Jun Aoqing. Aoqing. When Luo Eru saw Jun Aoqing appear, his eyes couldn't help but tremble, both of them shining brightly. "Luo Eru, aren't you being too nosy?" However, Jun Aoqing's reaction was cold and angry. She said, "Who I am close to and who I am far from is my own business. It has nothing to do with you." "Aoqing, I." In front of Jun Aoqing, Luo Eru completely lost his mind. He was no longer as arrogant and domineering as before. He was so nervous that he couldn't even speak. "Luo Eru, this lady likes to be close to Nye Tian. What are you going to do about it?" At this moment, Jun Aoqing suddenly took 2 steps forward and came to Nye Tian's side. She suddenly hugged the latter's arm and said. Nye Tian was shocked. He looked at Jun Aoqing in shock. He didn't expect the latter to do this. Luo Eru was stunned by the scene in front of him. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say a word. "Aoqing, that's enough." Jun Chujian couldn't stand it anymore and reprimanded in a low voice. Only then did Jun Aoqing let go of Nye Tian. She raised her chin and looked proud. Nye Tian shook his head, speechless. Luo Eru already hated him to the extreme, and now Jun Aoqing did this again. Luo Eru's hatred for Nye Tian was as deep as the sky and as deep as the sea. "Brat, you're dead meat." Luo Eru's eyes were as red as blood. He glared at Nye Tian and said coldly. Nye Tian smiled and said, "If you want to kill me, do it on the battle stage." Then, everyone was about to go to the battle stage, but Jun Chujian stopped them. "Lord Alliance Head, don't you think it's too late to stop their battle now?" Ling Yi faintly smiled as he looked at Jun Chujian. Jun Chujian frowned and said, "I won't stop their battle, but there are some things that need to be done before the battle." "What things?" Roten and Ling Yi were stunned and asked at the same time. "Don't worry, let's wait in the hall first." Jun Chujian said cold, then stepped forward and entered the Holy Heaven Hall. Ling Yi and Roten looked at each other and finally followed him into the hall. Since the battle had been decided, there was no need to rush. Everyone entered the Holy Heaven Hall and sat down. Jun Chujian didn't say anything and just asked everyone to wait. About half an hour later, many figures appeared outside the hall. "It's the other sect masters." Roten and Ling Yi couldn't help but be surprised when they saw those people. They didn't expect that Jun Chujian would gather all the sect masters of the other sections. After a while, a dozen figures entered the hall and sat down. Nye Tian noticed that among the dozen or so people, 4 of them had very powerful auras. Although they were slightly weaker than Luo Tong and Ling Yi, they weren't that much weaker. He guessed that these 4 people should be the sect masters of the other sects. In this way, The sect masters of the 7 great sword sects of the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance were all present. Jun Chujian wasn't only the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance's alliance master, but also the sect master of the Holy Heaven Sword sect. Originally, the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance was established under the initiative of the Holy Heaven Sword sect. The Sword Alliance master had always been the sect master of the Holy Heaven Sword sect. But in the recent hundreds of thousands of years, the Holy Heaven Sword sect's talents had withered, especially the middle generation. Apart from Jun Chujian, the Holy Heaven Sword sect didn't have any outstanding expert. Because of this, the other sects were eager to replace the Holy Heaven Sword sect and become the orthodox Holy Heaven Sword Alliance. Among the 7 great sword sects, the Rakshasa Sword sect and the Soaring Cloud Sword sect were the most powerful. They even overshadowed the Holy Heaven Sword sect. Roten and Lingyi had been coveting the position of Sword Alliance Master for a long time. Although Jun Chujian was powerful, he was old and reaching the limit of his life. He couldn't hold on for much longer. The other sects were waiting for Jun Chujian to fall. At that time, they could take advantage of the situation. Jun Aoqing was the most talented person in the Holy Heaven Sword sect in the past hundreds of thousands of years. It was a pity that she was too young. Jun Chujian wanted to nurture Jun Aoqing, but he didn't have the energy to do so. Jun Chujian knew that if he fell, the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance's 7 great sword sects would definitely have internal strife. This could very well lead to the decline of the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance. He really didn't want to see the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance decline in his hands. If that was the case, wouldn't Jun Chujian be the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance's sinner? Today, Jun Chujian had gathered the 7 great sword sect masters because of Nie Tian and the Holy Heaven Sword Seal. The Holy Heaven Sword Seal was the most important thing to the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance. If Nie Tian wanted to break the Holy Heaven Sword Seal, he would first need the 7 great sword sect masters' approval. Sect masters, I believe you have already heard. I recently invited a genius swordsman to help the Holy Heaven Sword Alliance break the Holy Heaven Sword Seal. Chapter 2258. Jun Chujian's voice echoed throughout the Elysium Hall. In the next moment, everyone's gaze was focused on Nie Tian, eager to know what was going on. Then, their expressions became strange. They all had a faint smile on their faces, but they didn't say a word. Sect masters, if there's anything you want to say, just say it. Don't hold it in. It's not good for you to keep it to yourself. Nie Tian stood up and smiled. Although the sect masters didn't say anything, he could guess what they were thinking from their expressions. That kind of contemptuous look, that kind of mocking and contemptuous expression, could not deceive anyone. Alliance Lord, forgive me for being blunt, but this kid's talent and strength are too ordinary. There's no way he can break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. The sect master of the Greenwood Sword sect was the first to speak. His tone was relatively calm. Alliance Lord, you're joking, right? If this kid can break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal, doesn't that mean that the swordsmen of our Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance are all trash? The sect master of the Golden Light Sword sect said disdainfully. Humph. A piece of trash that's only at the intermediate fusion of sword and martial arts wants to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal? He's simply humiliating our Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance. The sect master of the Sunken Abyss Sword sect sneered and swept his gaze across Nie Tian. He didn't even have the mood to look at the latter. The other sect masters also expressed their opinions, all of which were disdainful towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian had already expected such a scene, so his expression didn't change much. However, he could tell from the reactions of the other sect masters that the relationship between the 7 major sword sects was extremely tense. It was obvious that Jun Chujian, as the leader of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance, no longer had much control over the other sword sections. Jun Chujian furrowed his brows. He knew that the other sect masters would object, but he didn't expect them to be so agitated. Before Jun Chujian could say anything, Nie Tian spoke again with a faint smile. Dear sect leaders, all of you look down on me and think that my strength and talent are trash, right? The other sect leaders looked at Nie Tian with strange expressions. They had not expected Nie Tian to be so direct. Brat, your talent and strength are very trash, but your attitude is very arrogant. The Azure Wood Sect's sect master sneered, and said with a look of disdain, You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. If you can break the sacred heaven sword seal, I won't be surnamed Jean. The Golden Light sect master was even more disdainful as he laughed loudly. The other sect leaders also roared with laughter, obviously treating Nie Tian as an idiot. Shut up. Abruptly, Jun Ouching stood up and said loudly, You have no idea how strong Nie Tian is. He once defeated Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng with one move. Do you still think he's trash? The other sect leaders were stunned at first, but then they laughed even more wildly. Obviously, they took Jun Ouching's words as a joke. Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng were quite famous among the younger generation of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance. They were very strong. If Nie Tian defeated the two of them with one move, these sect leaders would not believe it at all. Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng were at the scene, but at this moment, their faces were tense and they did not say a word. They would not voluntarily admit that their strength was crushed by Nie Tian. Jun Ouching's little face was tense. She wanted to say something but was stopped by Nie Tian. Nie Tian directly stepped into the hall and said loudly, Since the sect leaders don't believe me and think that I'm trash, why don't we make a bet? Sect masters, please choose a young sword artist from your sect to challenge me. As long as I lose, I'll be at your disposal, sect masters. If I win, then give me a chance to break the sacred heaven sword seal. How about it? His calm voice caused the crowd to roar with laughter. Everyone looked at Nie Tian as if they were looking at an idiot with unscrupulous smiles on their faces, as if Nie Tian was a clown. Boom. Enough. Are you done laughing? At this moment, a loud sound rang out. Jun Chujian's hand fell and directly shattered the chair beside him. He said loudly, Nie Tian is a guest invited by me, not a clown that you can ridicule as you please. You think that his talent is trash, but I think that he is a sword Dao genius that only appears once in a billion years. If there is someone in this world who can break the sacred heaven sword seal, then this person must be Nie Tian. His voice was like thunder, shocking everyone. Everyone looked at Jun Chujian in horror, their expressions strange and shocked. They didn't understand why Jun Chujian, who had always been steady, would think so highly of Nie Tian. From Jun Chujian's words, Nie Tian was the #1 sword Dao genius that no one had ever seen before or since. Could it be that Nie Tian's talent was something that they couldn't see through? At this time, Ling Ye's voice rang out. Everyone, since Nie Tian has proposed it himself, and he is willing to accept the challenge from the genius swordsmen of the various sects, then let's fulfill his wish and let him die with a clear understanding. Yes. Then, Roten also stood up and said, The person that the Rakshasa sword sect will send to challenge Nie Tian is Luo Eru, and the Lingyun sword sect will send Ling Hanxing. The other sects can also send one person out. The other 4 sect leaders were stunned when they heard Ling Yi and Roten's words. They didn't expect that Nie Tian was serious. The Rakshasa sword sect and the Lingyun sword sect had both sent out challengers, and they were 2 very powerful swordsmen, Luo Eru and Ling Hanxing. Among the young swordsmen of the 7 major sword sects, these 2 were definitely in the top 5 in terms of strength. In that case, the Greenwood sword sect will join in the fun and send Mu Fei. The Greenwood sect leader stood up and said with a chuckle. Then, the other 3 sects also spoke and sent out challengers. Among the 7 major sword sects, except for the Sacred Heaven sword sect, the other 6 sects all sent out challengers. Alliance leader, how do you think the following battles should be carried out? At this moment, Ling Yi smiled darkly and said, How about we decide the order of the challenges, and then have one battle a day? Yes. Jun Chujian frowned and said, one battle a day, and the order of the challenges will be decided based on the combined strength of each sect. We'll start with the challenger from the Greenwood Sword sect. Luo Eru seemed unhappy at this decision, but he didn't dare to say anything. After all, this was a joint decision of the 7 major sword sections. Do we start today? Ling Yi smiled again and asked. Tomorrow, Jun Chujian said with a gloomy face. He knew that Nie Tian had suffered from Roten's sword aura and was slightly injured. Starting the challenges tomorrow was the best decision. No need. But at this moment, Nie Tian's voice sounded. Oh? Do you have a different opinion? Ling Yi seemed to have known that Nie Tian would speak, and his lips curled into a cold smile as he asked. I like the simplicity of it. Nie Tian smiled faintly, his eyes filled with domineering confidence. Let's start today. There's no need to decide the order of the challenges. Let the 6 of them come together. His calm voice fell, but it stunned everyone present. Chapter 2259. Nie Tian's voice was not loud, but it was like thunder from the 9th heaven, resounding in everyone's ears. Everyone widened their eyes and stared at Nie Tian in disbelief, as if suspecting that they had heard wrongly. Kid, what did you just say? After a dozen seconds, Ling Yi finally reacted, but he still had some doubts. He was so shocked that even his voice was trembling as he asked. Everyone's eyes trembled violently as they looked at Nie Tian one after another. Nie Tian's expression was very calm at this moment, as if nothing had happened. He glanced at everyone and said indifferently, I like to keep things simple. Let's start the battle today. In order to avoid trouble, there's no need for any order of challenge, just let all 6 challengers come together. Gulp. Everyone's expression froze, and the sound of throats rolling could be heard. This time, everyone heard it very clearly, very clearly. Nie Tian was going to accept the challenges of 6 challengers at the same time. In other words, he was going to fight against 6 people alone. The hall was silent for a few seconds again, and then there was a burst of laughter. Everyone laughed and looked at Nie Tian as if they were looking at an idiot. To them, Nie Tian's current action was indeed an idiotic move. One person fighting against 6 people at the same time, wasn't he tired of living? A few sect masters felt that Nie Tian was either a madman or an idiot. Because such a thing could only be done by a madman or an idiot. Any normal person would not make such a stupid decision. Nie Tian, have you thought it through? At this moment, Jun Chujian finally spoke. His reaction was relatively calm, and he asked in a deep voice. Nie Tian, don't do anything stupid, okay? Jun Aoqing also spoke. Her little face was very anxious, and she was obviously very worried. She knew that Nie Tian was very strong, but definitely not strong enough to fight against 6 powerful swordsmen at the same time. The challengers sent by the 6 major swordsmanship sects were all sword geniuses, and none of them were weak. Especially Luo Eru and Ling Hanxing. In Jun Aoqing's opinion, either one of them was no weaker than Nie Tian. Nie Tian's sudden words had indeed shocked her greatly. Alliance Master, I know what I'm doing. Nie Tian faintly smiled. His gaze swept across Jun Chujian, then fell onto Jun Aoqing. Jun Aoqing, don't worry, I'm very strong. Jun Aoqing could not help but be stunned when she sensed the overbearing confidence in Nie Tian's eyes. Her heart involuntarily trembled, as if there was an indescribable warmth surging through her. Nie Tian had said the same thing once before, when he was fighting against Ling Hanfeng. At that time, Jun Aoqing also didn't believe that Nie Tian had the ability to defeat Ling Hanfeng. But what happened afterwards greatly shocked her. Now that she heard Nie Tian say the same thing again, she was inexplicably excited. She vaguely felt that Nie Tian would bring her an even greater shock. Nie Tian's current plan was to completely shock everyone. The few sect masters and others didn't think highly of him. They all felt that he was a piece of trash that didn't have the qualifications to stand before the sacred heaven sword seal. Then he would use his actions to tell everyone that he, Nietian, wasn't a piece of trash. The best way to prove himself was to display his ability. But he felt that defeating the challengers of the six sects one by one would also be able to display his ability, but it wouldn't be shocking enough. What he wanted to do now was to let these people who looked down on him feel enough shock. He wanted to blind these people's dog eyes. "Kid, you said it yourself. No one forced you." Ling Yi smiled coldly, his eyes flashing with a malicious light. "Don't talk nonsense. Let's go directly to the fighting ring." Nie Tian laughed, his expression extremely cold and disdainful. How could he not know what Ling Yi was thinking? Ling Yi wanted to kill him. But unfortunately, he, Nie Tian, wasn't a soft persimmon that could be bullied by others. After saying that, Nie Tian directly walked out of the hall. A moment later, everyone came to the outside of the huge arena. Nie Tian walked at the front and directly walked towards the largest fighting ring. "Nie Tian, are you really confident?" Jun Ouching quickly followed, and asked in a low voice, obviously still a little worried. Nie Tian smiled confidently and said indifferently, "Don't worry, I'm really strong." Jun Ouching nodded her little head and didn't say anything else. Seeing this scene from behind, Luo Eru was so angry that his teeth were chattering. He roared in his heart, "Nie Tian, if I don't kill you with my own hands today, my name isn't Luo Eru." Seeing the woman he liked walking shoulder to shoulder with someone else, this feeling made Luo Eru go crazy. The other challengers also had grim expressions on their faces as they fixed Nie Tian with vicious looks in their eyes. "I'm going." As they were about to enter the arena, Nie Tian smiled at Jun Ouching, and then his body moved. He took a step forward and flew up into the sky. Jun Ouching's beautiful eyes flickered with worry and anticipation. She had a feeling that Nie Tian would definitely shock her again. Bang! As soon as Nie Tian landed on the arena floor, he looked over at Luo Eru and the others and shouted, "Get on the arena floor and prepare to die." Luo Eru and the other experts' faces were filled with rage as they dashed forward and surrounded Nie Tian like streaks of light. When the sect lords saw what was happening, they couldn't help but chuckle coldly. "This brat is way too arrogant. I really don't understand where a trifling early paramount god trash like him gets the guts to act so arrogantly. Let him be arrogant for a while. He's going to die anyway, so what's the harm in being arrogant? The way I see it, this brat knows he's going to die, so he's just being arrogant. There's no need to take him seriously. Let's just have some fun." All of the sect masters looked at Nie Tian with disdain in their eyes, which were filled with sarcasm and contempt. Jun Chujian glanced coldly at these sect masters and the corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile. In truth, he wasn't confident at all. He didn't know what Nie Tian's battle prowess was like. But he knew that if Nie Tian couldn't even defeat these six people, then there was no way he could break the sacred heaven sword seal. Therefore, this battle was a test for Nie Tian. If Nie Tian died, then Jun Chujian could only express his regret. "Fellow sect lords." At this moment, Nie Tian's arrogant voice sounded from the fighting ring again. "Open your eyes and watch how I defeat these challengers." One had to admit that Nie Tian was very arrogant right now. He didn't want to act like this, but the taunting words of these sect lords really pissed him off. Since they were looking down on Nie Tian had no choice but to show them how arrogant he was. This brat is really tired of living. The sect lords gnashed their teeth in hatred, their eyes glaring at Nie Tian as if they wanted to skin him alive. However, in the next moment their expressions changed. Chapter 2260. This. Suddenly seeing the soaring sword aura, the six sect leaders' eyes trembled violently at the same time. They all gasped and were stunned on the spot. That terrifying sword aura was released from Nie Tian's body. At this moment, Nie Tian stood on the fighting ring with a circumference of 10,000 meters. His entire body was like a giant sword that could support the heavens and the earth, and his aura was vigorous and vast. The 6 sect leaders obviously didn't expect that Nye could actually release such a terrifying sword aura. Am I seeing things? How can this kid's sword aura be so strong? The sect leader of the Greenwood Sword sect was the first to speak. His expression was incomparably shocked, and even his voice was slightly trembling. This kid is clearly only at the intermediate stage of unity of sword and martial art. Why is his sword aura even stronger than a swordsman at the peak of unity of sword and martial arts? The sect leader of the Golden Light Sword sect's face muscles twitched, and his facial features stiffened. This kid's sword essence is so terrifying. Among swordsmen of the same level as him, I have never seen a sword essence that is stronger than his. The sect leader of the Wind God Sword sect also spoke, and his eyes were filled with extreme shock. As for Roten and Lingyi, after they came back to their senses, they both looked extremely embarrassed. At this moment, they finally understood why Nye could defeat Luo Sanfeng and Ling Hanfeng. Judging from Nye sword aura, his battle strength was definitely above Luo Sanfeng and Ling Hanfeng's. These sect leaders were all strong swordsmen. Even if they were 10,000 meters away, they could still clearly feel the strength of Nietion's sword essence. Without a doubt, Nietion's strength far exceeded their expectations. Nietion, you are indeed very strong. Jun Chujian's reaction was completely different from the other sect leaders. The corner of his mouth raised slightly, and his eyes were unable to conceal the blazing passion. He was looking forward to Nietion creating a miracle. Nietion stood on the fighting ring, but he saw everyone's reaction. Are you shocked now? The corner of his mouth twitched. He laughed in his heart and said, the real shock is yet to come. At this moment, the expressions of the 6 swordsmen on the fighting ring changed. The disdain on their faces was replaced by deep fear. Everyone, be careful. There's something strange about this kid's strength. Ling Hanxing was the calmest, and also the most cunning. In a loud voice, he said, from now on, we definitely cannot underestimate him. We must treat him as a real opponent. Humph. Nietion's gaze swept over Ling Hanxing, and the corners of his mouth curled up in a cold arc. He said coldly, now that you know that I'm your true opponent, isn't it too late? Ling Hanxing looked at Nietion and couldn't help but focus his gaze. The latter's gaze actually made him feel an extremely strong threat. The strength that Nietion had displayed was enough for the 6 challengers to take seriously. In particular, the sword intent around Nietion's body was very sharp, as if it contained infinite possibilities. In the next moment, Ling Hanxing's face darkened and he roared, attack! The 6 challengers moved at the same time. 6 sword auras suddenly rose up, like 6 pillars supporting the sky, from the fighting ring. At this moment, even Luo Eru also felt how terrifying Nietion was. He didn't dare to be careless. Is this all you've got? Too weak. Nietion's gaze swept over the 6 people, and the corner of his mouth curled up in a cold and domineering smile. Black runes surged over his body, and the 3 forbidden skills in his body were activated at the same time. The aura around him skyrocketed. 12 heaven-slaying sword formation, open. Then, he roared, and the sword intent surged over his body. In the space around him, there were actually 12 huge sword shadows rising. This! Ling Hanxing and the others were stunned by the scene in front of them. They couldn't help but gasp in shock. Never in their wildest dreams had they ever imagined that Nietion's strength would be so terrifying. That kind of violent aura that was like a dragon surged out, and even the huge fighting platform began to shake along with it. This kid is so scary. The 6 sect leaders who were watching from afar were shocked when they saw the shocking scene on the fighting ring. If the sword aura that Nietion had displayed just now had surprised them, then the 12 huge sword shadows on the fighting ring were enough to frighten them. It was hard to imagine that Nietion's body could burst forth with such terrifying power. Let's attack together and kill him. At this moment, Ling Hanxing's voice sounded. He roared and took the lead to attack. The long sword in his hand rose into the air, and a cold sword shadow whizzed out, blasting towards Nietian. Boom! 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 At the same time, the others also attacked. Several terrifying sword shadows rolled towards Nietian. Facing the joint attack of 6 powerful swordsmen, Nietian was not afraid at all. What was surging in his eyes was a strong desire to fight. Kill! He roared, and the divine demon power in his body rolled out. At the same time, the 12 huge sword shadows around him also rolled up, like a huge dragon, surging in the air. In the next moment, the 12 sword shadows actually merged into one, turning into a sword shadow that was nearly 10,000 meters long, like a giant, supporting the sky and the earth. Boom! Then, the huge sword shadow suddenly shook in the air. Boundless sword essence suddenly surged out, and the surrounding void shook slightly. A dazzling sword light suddenly bloomed, and the brilliance of the sword spread out for 10,000 meters, covering the whole fighting ring. Boom boom! Boom boom! Boom boom! In the void there were countless explosions. The sword shadows that rushed towards Nietian were directly shattered by the sword essence around him before they could even get close to him. Ling Hanxing, Luo Eru, and the other 6 challengers were stunned by the scene in front of them. Their mouths were wide open, but no sound came out. Boom! 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 In the next moment, a series of muffled sounds came from the air. The 6 figures were sent flying back at the same time, drawing 6 bloody trails in the air. At this moment, the eyes of everyone outside the martial arena became dull. Their nerves were stretched taut to the extreme, and the shock in their hearts was perfectly displayed on their faces. Who would have thought that Nietian's strength was so terrifying? At this time, the spectators outside the arena were not only Jun Chujian and the 6 sect masters, but also countless disciples of the Sacred Heaven Sword sect. Under countless gazes, the 6 figures suddenly fell to the ground, drawing 6 deep bloody ravines on the ground. The scene fell into a dead silence. The expressions and gazes of the crowd all expressed the same word: shock. Shock, unparalleled shock, indescribable shock. Especially the 6 sect masters, their stiff old faces were like blooming chrysanthemums that suddenly withered. They couldn't believe what was happening in front of their eyes. This was something that they had never expected at all. Nietian defeated 6 challengers at the same time. Moreover, he defeated all 6 of them in an absolutely crushing manner. Those were 6 late-stage supreme gods who were at the peak of the sword martial union. In their eyes, Nietian was just a swordsman with a weak sword Dao. How could he explode with such terrifying power? Before this battle, the result Nietian wanted was to blind the eyes of the 6 sect masters. Now, from the expressions of the 6 sect masters. Chapter 2261. Inside and outside the arena, it was silent for a full 10 seconds. During this time, it was as if time and space had stopped. Everyone's eyes were focused on the silver-haired figure on the platform, and their expressions were extremely shocked. Now, who else is not convinced? Nietian stood on the platform, his eyes sweeping across everyone as he spoke in a domineering tone. At this moment, he really wanted to ask the 6 sect masters how they felt about this scene. As his domineering voice fell, everyone's eyes trembled, and they finally reacted. The swordsmen of the Sacred Heaven Sword sect looked at Nietian with shock and awe. The 6 sect masters looked extremely embarrassed. They looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Outside the fighting ring, the 6 challengers finally made a move. They struggled with great difficulty trying to stand up, but all 6 of them were covered in blood, and their injuries were not light. In the end, except for Luo Eru and Ling Hanxing, who barely managed to stand up, the other 4 could not even get up. At this moment, Luo Eru and Ling Hanxing looked at Nietian, no longer with the arrogance and contempt they had before. Instead, it was replaced by fear and wariness. At this moment, they finally realized how big the gap between them and Nie Tian was. Nie Tianling laughed, his eyes sweeping across Luo Eru and the others, not even interested in looking at them. This challenge is over. With a faint smile, Nie Tian's figure moved, and he jumped off the platform in a very elegant manner. At this moment, he was very proud, but he concealed it well. In fact, even he himself did not expect that the 12 heaven-slaying sword array combined with the demon god's sword intent would be so terrifying. This was the first time he used the demon god's sword intent to form a formation, and the effect was unexpectedly strong. He originally thought that after the 12 heaven-slaying sword array, Luo Eru and Ling Hanxing would definitely still be standing on the platform. To his surprise, Luo Eru and Ling Hanxing could not withstand the impact of the sword formation. Fortunately, he used the 12 heaven-slaying sword array, which was the weakest of the 3 major sword formations of the AO sword technique. If he had used the other 2 sword formations, the 6 challengers would have been killed instantly. Nie Tian did not want to kill the 6 of them. He just wanted to give the 6 sect masters a shock. Nie Tian. Jun Aoqing saw Nie Tian coming down from the fighting ring. She moved and welcomed him happily. She didn't expect Nie Tian's strength to be so terrifying. I've said it before, I'm very strong. Nie Tian looked at Jun Aoqing and smiled faintly, the corners of his lips curling into an indifferent arc. On the other side, Jun Chujian smiled and said in a clear voice, "Fellow sect leaders, let us return to the main hall first." He could still maintain a calm expression on his face, but only he knew the shock in his heart. He guessed that Nie Tian could defeat 6 challengers, but in his mind, he imagined that Nie Tian would have a Pyrrhic victory. In reality, Nie Tian had crushed all 6 of them. He could even tell that Nie Tian had not used his full strength just now. At this moment, he firmly believed that Nie Tian was the one who could break the sacred heaven sword seal. A moment later, everyone returned to the sacred sky hall. "Fellow sect leaders, do you have anything else to say?" Jun Chujian's voice sounded, and there was a hint of pride in his hearty voice. The 6 sect leaders looked at each other without saying a word. Not long ago, they had mocked and humiliated Nie Tian in every possible way. However, Nie Tian had used his own strength to slap their faces. It was as if all the mockery and humiliation had been returned to them. Seeing that the 6 sect leaders were silent, Nie Tian smiled faintly and stood up. He said in a loud voice, "I only have one question. Do I, Nie Tian, have the right to stand before the sacred heaven sword seal?" His calm voice resounded in the hall, and it was like a loud slap to the faces of the 6 sect leaders. The 6 sect leaders were like eggplants that had been hit by frost, and all of them wilted. Seeing this, Jun Aoqing covered her mouth. She wanted to laugh, but was too embarrassed to do so. "Fellow sect leaders, you were all very talkative before. Why have you all become mute now?" Nie Tianling laughed arrogantly. The Greenwood sect leader was the first to relent, and he actually used a respectful title for Nie Tian. He stood up and said, "Lord Nie Tian, I acknowledge your right. I also acknowledge Lord Nie Tian's right." The Divine Wind sect leader also stood up and expressed his stance. "I also acknowledge his right." The Golden Light sect leader and the Qinyuan sect leader stood up at the same time and bowed. These sect leaders were all very smart people. Nie Tian's mockery of them was actually nothing much. Their change in attitude towards Nie Tian wasn't because they truly acknowledged Nie Tian, but because they felt that Nie Tian could really break the sacred heaven sword seal. As long as the sacred heaven sword seal was broken, it would be equivalent to opening the entrance to the sacred heaven sword tomb. There were countless sword Dao inheritances in the sacred heaven sword tomb. This was an immeasurable wealth for the 7 major swordsmanship sections. But now, the sect leaders saw hope in Nie Tian to break the sacred heaven sword seal. How could their attitude not change? Nie Tian smiled faintly and stopped mocking them. Instead, he looked at Roten and Ling Yi and asked, "Sect leader Luo, sect leader Ling, What do you think? He knew that enough was enough, and he was really asking for Roten and Ling Ye's opinion. Yes. Roten and Ling Yi looked at each other and nodded at the same time. The two of them were smarter than the other sect masters, and they also saw hope in Nye Tian. Very well. When Jun Chujian saw the 6 sect masters nodding their heads, he laughed heartily and said, "Since all the sect masters have acknowledged Nye Tian's qualifications, then I'll let Nye Tian make some preparations. We'll officially head to the sacred sky peak in 7 days." The 6 sect leaders nodded in agreement. Nye Tian smiled faintly in agreement. He had seen the sacred heaven sword seal before and felt that it was very strange. He indeed needed to prepare. Jun Chujian nodded and said, "Sect leaders, since you've come to Cloud Valley Sacred Heaven, stay here for the time being. We'll head to Mount Xingtian together in 7 days." Yes. The 6 sect leaders bowed. They obviously wouldn't leave at this time. If Nye Tian broke the sacred heaven sword seal in advance and they weren't there, wouldn't they suffer a great loss? Next, the 6 sect leaders left the hall with their respective sections. Soon, only Jun Chujian, Nye Tian, and Jun Aoqing were left in the hall. "Aoqing, you go first. I have something to say to Nye Tian." Jun Chujian calmly smiled and said to Jun Aoqing, "Is there anything you want to say that you can't let me know?" Jun Aoqing pouted her little mouth high, very unhappy. "It's nothing." Jun Chujian shook his head helplessly. "If you want to hear it, then stay." "Yes, yes." Jun Aoqing nodded. The gloomy sky was about to clear up. Nye Tian looked at Jun Aoqing and couldn't help but smile. The latter was indeed still a child. He then looked at Jun Chujian and asked, "Lord, what do you want to say to me?" Chapter 2262. Nye Tian was stunned when he heard Jun Chujian's words. He hadn't expected that Jun Chujian would actually want to discuss the Sword Dao with him. "Right now, I only know the Spirit Realm Sword Dao and the God Realm Sword Dao." Nye Tian nodded slightly and told him about the Sword Dao realms that he knew. Currently, he knew of 2 great realms of Sword Dao, the Spirit Realm Sword Dao and the God Realm Sword Dao. The Spirit Realm Dao of the sword had 10 great realms: sword moves, sword techniques, sword chi, sword heart, sword intent, sword force, sword spirit, sword soul, and sword profundity. There were 6 great realms in the godly stage of the Sword Dao: sword marking, sword vein, sword bone, sword essence, sword oblivion, and sword martial unity. In that case, the highest realm of Sword Dao that you know should be the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one, right? Jun Chujian nodded slightly and smiled faintly. "Yes." Nye Tian nodded. His eyes flickered as he asked, "Alliance leader, there's a higher realm above the godly state sword principle, right?" Since Jun Chujian suddenly talked to him about the Sword Dao realm, it was obvious that he wanted to tell him something. "Of course," Jun Chujian chuckled and said, "as the saying goes, martial arts have no limits. The same goes for sword arts. There are indeed better sword principles above the godly state sword principles. In the Forsaken Land, the most talented swordsmen can all reach the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. A swordsman with peak talent would be able to reach a whole new realm of the way of the sword that surpasses the fusion of sword and martial arts." Hearing Jun Chujian's words, Nye Tian's eyes lit up and he asked, "What is the realm of Sword Dao that surpasses the unity of sword and martial arts?" In fact, he already knew that there was definitely a higher realm of the Sword Dao above the unity of sword and martial arts. When he met Anya Minjia and the others before, he clearly felt that the sword intent of these people was stronger than that of the legendary swordsmen such as Sakura and Firestorm Qianyu. This undoubtedly showed that Anya Minjia and the others' sword principles were above the legendary realm. Nye Tian was a swordsman, and there was no need to doubt his desire to pursue a higher Sword Dao, even though he was still far from the legendary realm. However, understanding a higher realm of the Sword Dao would be greatly beneficial to his future path of the Sword Dao. It could also broaden his horizons of the sword Dao. Jun Aoqing was also very focused at the moment. Obviously, she did not know what the higher realm of sword Dao was. 3 transcendent realms. Jun Chujian's gaze changed slightly and his expression became much more serious. He said, "The realm of the way of the sword above the unity of sword and martial arts is known as the 3 realms of transcending God." Transcendent God Level 3. Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing's eyes trembled at the same time, their eyes burning. Seeing their reactions, Jun Chujian nodded and continued, "The so-called 3 realms of the transcendent God are 3 realms of the way of the sword that surpass the unity of sword and martial arts. They are the transcendent sword soul, the transcendent sword body, and the transcendent profound." Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing's eyes lit up. The shock in their hearts was written on their faces as they waited for Jun Chujian to continue. The 3 realms of the transcendent God are the foundations of the unity of sword and martial arts. Jun Chujian's eyes were like torches as he said, "Use your own soul to stimulate the sword intent once again, condensing an even stronger sword soul, sword body, and profound. In the Forsaken Land, only those with peak talent in the way of the sword can reach the 3 realms of the transcendent God. I estimate that there are no more than 100 transcendent God swordsmen in the entire Forsaken Land." Nie Tian's pupils constricted slightly, his expression filled with shock. The Forsaken Land was formed by fragments of the sacred world. It was difficult to estimate how big it was, and it was even more impossible to know how many people there were. There were so many people, but there were less than 100 transcendent God swordsmen. It was obvious how difficult it was to reach this realm. At this moment, Nie Tian's eyes lit up and he asked excitedly, "Alliance leader, have the 6 sect leaders reached the 3 realms of the transcendent God?" "Yes." Jun Chujian nodded with a smile and said, "Roten and the others are the sect leaders of the sword sect. Their talent in the way of the sword is naturally very strong. The 6 of them are all at the transcendent God sword soul realm. Among them, Roten and Lingyi are the most powerful. They are already at the peak of the transcendent God sword soul realm and should be able to reach the transcendent God sword body realm soon." Nie Tian nodded slightly and then asked, "What about the 3 legends of the sword world? What are their realms like?" Dark Night Bright Cliff, Light Martial Year of the Phoenix, Sikong Shwani. Jun Chujian's lips curled up and he said, "These 3 are known as the 3 legends. Their sword arts have long reached the transcendent God sword body realm." Nie Tian nodded slightly. He had previously sensed that the sword intent of the 6 sect leaders was indeed a little weaker than that of the 3 legends. At this moment, Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly and he could not help but ask, "Alliance leader, what about you?" He felt that Jun Chujian's sword intent seemed to be stronger than that of the 3 legends. He was curious as to what level Jun Chujian's cultivation had reached. "I'm also at the transcendent God sword body realm, but I'm just a little stronger than the 3 legends." Jun Chujian seemed to know what Nie Tian was thinking and said with a faint smile. Nie Tian frowned. Jun Chujian's strength did not seem to be as strong as he had imagined. He had originally thought that Jun Chujian was already at the transcendent God ultimacy realm. A thought suddenly occurred to Nie Tian and he asked, "Alliance head, I have a question, but I'm not sure if I should ask it." "Go ahead." Jun Chujian smiled calmly. "Alliance leader, with your strength, you should be able to crush the 6 sect leaders." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he said, "I'm very curious. Why did you tolerate Roten, Lingyi, and the others and let them be so presumptuous in front of you?" Nie Tian had long wanted to ask this question, but he had never found the right opportunity. Nie Tian had a rough understanding of the relationship between the 7 major swordsmanship sects of the Sacred Heaven Sword League. Even if Jun Chujian wanted to stabilize the Sacred Heaven Sword League, he didn't have to use such a weak method. If he faced the 6 sect leaders with a tough attitude, perhaps the unity of the Sacred Heaven Sword League would be much better. Weakness was the biggest taboo for people in high positions. It was impossible for Jun Chu-jian not to know this. "Nie Tian, since you've asked, I won't hide it from you." Jun Chu-jian looked at Nie Tian, but his face suddenly became much more solemn. Then, his figure moved slightly, and a sword intent surged out of his body and condensed into an illusory sword shadow, which actually merged with his body. "This is..." Nie Tian was taken aback. He was quite surprised. He had never seen such a scene at all. The sword shadow outside Jun Chu-jian's body had a very strange aura, as if the sword shadow was Jun Chu-jian himself and perfectly merged with his body. "Nie Tian, this is the ultimate divine sword body of a divine swordsman," Jun Chu-jian said in a deep voice, and his eyes flickered as he said, "Look carefully, what did you find?" "Ultimate divine sword body." Nie Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed. He then forced himself to calm down and carefully sense the sword shadow outside Jun Chu-jian's body. In the next moment, he finally found something strange, and his expression suddenly changed as he exclaimed, "Crack!" He actually found a crack on Jun Chu-jian's ultimate divine sword body. The crack was very hidden, and if one didn't look carefully, it would be impossible to discover it.